All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have such an exciting guest, and I've been waiting and wanting to get him in for such a long time. This is Steve Timoney. So Steve started out in Glasgow in Scotland in a place called Easterhouse, and he grew up in one of the toughest housing schemes in the UK. Now from there, he went to build a business empire worth hundreds of millions. And I know for a fact that you'll definitely know a couple of the businesses he's been involved with. So firstly, Steve co-founded the smart metering system, which is like what you put on your gas meters from his loft. He then helped it grow into a £1.3 billion business. That's what it sold for. After that, he then decided to buy a castle in Scotland, and that castle was called Crossbasket Castle. He turned this into one of the leading luxury hotels in Scotland. And then after that, he went on to basketball. He invested heavily in basketball through the Caledonia Gladiators, and I think the sum of his investments into basketball, he does touch on it a little bit on this podcast, is upwards of £20 million. Now in today's podcast, we cover so much, from growing up in a council estate, to business, to selling your business, to what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and everything in between. I honestly think you're going to take so much from this podcast because I know for a fact that I did. But before we start, as always, guys, if you could do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, 5-star button, whatever it is, wherever you are, I'd really appreciate it. It makes such a huge difference, and the more likes and 5 stars and all that kind of stuff we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the podcast. So thank you. But without further ado, my name is Harrison Brown. This is the Into the Mind podcast, and let's welcome Steve Timoney. There's so much I want to cover, but I think to start with, it's important that we rewind to the start to figure out how you got to where you are and what the background was. So talk to me a bit about your upbringing.
Oh, you mean I've got to try to figure that out without my therapist in the room? That's interesting. But I mean, it goes back a long way to, I didn't have a particularly nice upbringing, to be honest with you, but I value it because I think it developed the character and the toughness I've got, which is largely what's got me to where I've got to. But I grew up in Easterhouse. And I grew up in my teenage years in the 70s and 80s, which was the most violent time in Easterhouse. So my upbringing was kind of, you know, I had a kind of tough family. My father was an ex-boxer and all that kind of thing, quite a proud man, a small man, but a proud man. And so in a place like Easterhouse at the height of gangland, having a proud family that were quite tough was not necessarily an advantage because people would challenge you all the time. So we were always a wee bit of a target for other families that knew us to try to kind of knock you off the spot, if you like. Okay. And so that made, I guess, life in Easterhouse, I don't like saying dangerous because it almost dramatises it, but in essence, anybody going in that wasn't used to that environment would find it dangerous. You couldn't walk out your own area. We stayed in a place called Drumlanrig, or Drummy as it was called. It was always, everywhere in those days was delineated by the gang that run the territory. Right. Which is kind of coming back in now, actually, after all these years, but dissipated as the kind of gangland figures grew up and got into real crime, you know. But back in the day, you had to be careful, and I knew my boundaries. And the interesting thing I had was I was a milk delivery boy that delivered all over Easterhouse, and that carries with it some very special concessions because you can go into other gangland areas at 3 or 4 in the morning and run up stairs in tenement flats and be safe. And the only reason you were safe was because we made it known that if we were ever attacked as milk boys, we would stop delivering milk to that street, right? And so, yeah, honestly, and so the one or two that did challenges get the living daylights knocked out of them by their parents, because when you stopped milking in the days, you had no milk for your breakfast. They didn't have the big supermarkets in the days. Right. And so milk delivery, which became milk and bread and potatoes, was quite an important thing. But it was extremely dangerous, you know, because the gangs would sometimes come out to meet us just to look threatening. And as we passed by in our wee electric milk float that could only do 15 miles an hour. And that had an effect on you, that you were always, I mean, you had great peripheral vision, you were always looking about, you were always looking at everybody and studying their body language. You kind of had to anticipate whether they were going to try to harm you or not, whether they were just passers by. Knife crime, right? Yeah, it was mostly knife crime back then. I mean, back in the days, it was well known that, I mean, this sounds a bit brutal, but it was well known that it was safe to carry knives and safe to attack somebody with a knife, providing you used a knife properly. Which sounds a bit brutal, doesn't it? So gangs back then knew that if they used a knife, you know, in a violent way, they're probably going to prison. But if they used a knife in a disfigurement way, they were probably going to get away with it. Jesus. So you were always in danger of being attacked by knife crime. And being a milk boy was kind of funny because when you were delivering your milk, you were relatively safe. Now, you were going into very dangerous situations, into rival gang territories, but you were safe. And you got to understand that because nobody wanted we used to cut off the milk for the whole street. So the pressure was on them. If one of the kids in the street caused a problem, all the neighbours were saying, well, you need to sort it out, you caused a problem. It was a very strange upbringing. But out of hours, once you were off duty, it was extremely dangerous because I knew who you were. And so we used to shop in one of the prototype shopping centres called the Bywell, which was a big shopping centre. But that was right between 2 or 3 rival gang territories. And I had to be very careful going there because if they spotted me, they chased me out of the place. Now, they still didn't do any harm to me, but they chased me out of the place because they knew I was a milk boy. They knew I was from a rival gang territory and they were after you.
So just because you were from the rival gang territory, does that automatically associate you with that gang?
Yeah. I mean, it was territorial to the extent where you weren't allowed to cross borders. If you were from Drumlanrig or Drummy and you went to an area called, it's got a lot of parallels with today's modern world. So there's a place called Dentoy, was another rival gang area adjacent to us, but in between was a place called Calcots. And that was disputed territory.
Okay.
So we used to always fight over whether you were allowed there or not. But it was a very dangerous place to grow up. But what it did for me growing up, I suppose, is coming from the family I came from, when my father was well known, was that you became very alert. You know, you didn't go for a casual walk. You were looking at every bush and looking around every corner, and you were judging people. You became very good at judging whether somebody was looking a wee bit as if, they might have ill intent. And of course, a survival instinct, because when you grow up in a place like that, you're trying to get through it, and you see a lot of really brutal violence, and it gives you a survival instinct where you push through. And to be honest with you, people ask me all the time where I made up my mind to do something different, because most people that grow up in that environment just do the same thing every day and slot into the fact that you're not expected to do well for yourself. It's almost that the culture is that you're okay if you looked at somebody that's not trying to be out there. But the minute you show intent to be better than everybody else, you become an enemy. Even within your own area.
I think that's a Glasgow thing, right? I think that, or Scotland thing. I think that if you were to go to America and drive a Porsche, people would go, "Oh my God, well in, like you're driving a Porsche." But in Scotland or the UK, you drive a Porsche and people go, "Wanker."
Yeah, see, to be honest, Harrison, it's lived with me all my life, and one of the things I don't like about the Scottish mentality is exactly that.
Yeah.
And so what you get is a situation where if you become successful, you risk falling out with the people that protect you. So you're in your own territory. As long as you don't stand out and you're one of the boys or one of the girls, you're okay. But the minute you start to talk big, then it's, but who do you think you are? You're making the rest of us look bad. And that is a cultural thing in Scotland where if you're successful, people think it makes them look bad. And my view is, why don't you address, your thoughts of becoming ambitious and follow my example? Because I think if Scotland became a far more ambitious country, if Scotland was able to become an ambitious country by looking at people that have done well and modelling or getting them to speak to them or learning from them, that ambition grows success. And I think that's a key thing, because I remember the day I decided to go out Easterhouse. I was about 14, 15. I was standing in the top floor of a tenement flat where my house was down in the middle floor. And I was upstairs speaking to one of my pals, and I looked out the wee landing window, and there was this dull, grey, horrible day. It was drizzly. I was looking at a place I used to stay called Drumlanrig Quadrant, and I was looking at my pals walking around a square, which they'd done all day. They just walked around the same sort of mile circuit. And I was looking at them thinking, good God, if I'm here in 50 years. And my father actually, for the fighting man he was, would sit me down at my desk studying in front of the window. And I used to say to him, Dad, I can see all my friends playing football and I can now go and play football. I say, son, they'll be playing football in 50 years. You won't. And so it was kind of teach me a lesson of see what they're doing down there. You need to know what they're doing down there. You need to accept it and you need to fight against it. You need to reject it. That's why I'm making you look at it while you're studying your books. And that was a lesson that lasted well with me, in the sense that it was kind of saying the world will not move on unless you do something big to get out of here. And it was a memory, I still have a very, very clear memory of that vision of looking out onto the street and seeing these people and thinking, this can't be what life's about, And that kind of spurred me on to getting a job with British Gas, which was unheard of at that time, to get a kind of apprenticeship with British Gas. And then my ambition grew from there. So you learn a lot of lessons.
Did you go to the same school as Harry?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, we grew up in Easterhouse together. I think actually Harry was at the school across the road.
Right.
But it was funny because I knew I didn't know about Harry back in the day, but there was another chap that ran a jewellery business from Easterhouse, which is quite unusual. You know,
Aye.
people that get into jewellery business born in Easterhouse, almost a contradiction in terms, you know. Most of the people at jewellery in Easterhouse stole it. They were robbers, you know. So it was interesting to find out. I found out later on that actually Harry's were at the same school, but there was a chap, I can't remember his name, he had a strange name. He was one of the guys that stood out, actually. The guy, if I can remember his name, it'll come back to me, but he was a guy that got a hard time because he was trying to build a business from being an Easterhouse boy, and actually the parallels with Harry were quite funny. So I can see with my friendship with your dad that he's got that same character that I've got, is that sense of survival. And
exactly. I think it's interesting with yourself and Harry and the people that broke out of that, because oftentimes when you're in a friend group and you're kind of your peers are all doing the one thing, it's extremely hard to break out of that, because in breaking out of that, you essentially are slicing off all your friends. It's interesting that yourself, also Harry, had the mentality to go out on your own.
It's hard to detect where it came from, other than the fact that, you know, when you experience a lot of violence growing up, it shapes you. But you still have to make that decision that that's not for you. And I've always said, see, when you grow up, I'm sure Harry would say this, when you grow up in a place like Easterhouse, you're in the fine line between going down the criminal road, if you're clever, and going down a legitimate road, because it's very easy to be a clever criminal, because most criminals are not. And so it's very easy to say, well, actually, I could do better at that and make more money at that. And so you're always in the borderline between being led, as I nearly did a few times, being led into places that meant you were going to be a lifelong criminal, and making the step to get out. And really, the reason I was able to make that was, although my father was a fighting man, he was a professional boxer. He fought for the world title twice. He always tells me not to tell people I get knocked out in the first round twice. And Tommy Gilmer Sr. actually was his manager, so he was quite an important boxer in his day. But he was a man that really had a strong sense of right and wrong, a real strong sense of right and wrong, which you didn't really see in him from seeing him how he operated. But he kept me right in the sense that he would always say, you know, I mean, I used to go to the Army Cadets and I joined the boxing thing, and he stopped me boxing. I says, why you stopped me boxing? That was your career. He says, you're too pretty. I don't want you boxing. I don't want you doing anything violent. I don't want you boxing. I want you to do something different with your life. And he gave me, I think what I get from him is a real strong sense of what's right and wrong. It's lived with me all my life. I mean, my entire life is about doing what I think is the right thing. And I get that strong sense of values from my father. And that is essentially what guided me away from crime and into try to do something legitimate, which at the time seemed insurmountable. It seemed like you could never do that. Yeah. And people start hating you. Same as you said about Harry. What happens when you articulate anything that doesn't involve doing what everybody else does is they start hating you, and you start getting targeted for being somebody that wants to do something else. And that's a difficult thing to push through. I had to leave Easterhouse to push through that. I couldn't stay in Easterhouse. So my very early days, 19, I bought a house, which was like, you bought a house, what do you think you are? You know, I bought a house in Cumbernauld, which is a place I didn't particularly enjoy living, to be honest, but it got me away from Easterhouse, and I had to make that break to get away from the mentality of come out with your pals, we'll go and play football and smoke some weed and all that kind of stuff, which they were doing at the time, you know.
Do you think that, I mean, we'll get on to the actual career, the kind of the future, but do you think that you were driven in life, or you're being dragged from what's happened in the past?
A wee bit of both, I suppose. The drive comes from the need for me to, you know, I don't like when entrepreneurs who have made it say they were selling oranges in the playground and all that kind of nonsense, and it was obvious I was an entrepreneur for the start, because in my view, most of that's bullshit. That's what you invent after you're successful, you know. I was always an entrepreneur.
Sure.
And if anybody had a big strategy when they were 14 or 15, they're also talking shit, right? Because what happens when you're in a place like I'm in is your strategy is what you decide that day, and hopefully you move yourself in the right direction. And so I can't say I had tremendous drive back then, but I had a tremendous will to survive back then. And I get caught up in some things that threatened even that, to be honest with you, but I was really about how do I survive this kind of lifestyle and make small moves one day at a time to try to get myself out. And so people might say that I was driven back then. I was probably more driven than the average punter that grew up in Easterhouse. But I certainly wouldn't describe myself as driven back then. You know, I had to put myself into far more challenging environments than playing football every day and just talking shit with your friends, you know, because that's all you did all day. And I had to separate myself out, and I did that through my books. You know, I did that. I'll give you a good example of the resentment you get. I mean, I was known as somebody that was quite clever in school. I missed a whole primary 5, I think it was, because I was too far advanced apparently for my peers. So they jumped me 2 years. That wee kind of thing just reinforces maybe somebody sees something in you that you don't see yourself, and it gives you a wee bit more self-belief. But my brother-in-law at the time, when I was studying for my O-levels and my hires, burnt all my books. He took all my books down and shouted them up, and I looked out the window and he says, "You like the bonfire?" I said, "That's tremendous." He says, "It's all your books." He thought it was funny. And so I had to actually sit my exams without any reference books. And at the time you didn't have Google and internet and stuff, so I was really struggling with all my jotters and stuff to look back through it. And I still got, at the time I got 7 O-levels and 5 hires without any books. But Jesus, I had to find some clever ways of getting the content again. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law, who's supposed to have your best interests at heart, married to my sister at a very young age, thought it was funny just to burn all my books because he was not academic. So these are the kind of things that challenge you and actually make you think, right, I need to get out here. That's where drive comes from. Sure. It's a bit at a time. It's a bit like, I'm not putting up with that. I need to find a way through this. I got my exams. I got into university. I got Glasgow, Strathclyde, Paisley, I think at the time. But I didn't go to university because I had to make money. And so my view was, I can't go to university. I regret that to this day, not being an alumni of one of the main Glasgow universities. But I couldn't, I had to work. So I had to go out to work.
Why'd you regret it?
I kind of regret it because I see my kids going to university and enjoying that social side of university life and the discipline of, well, less discipline than my day, I suppose, discipline of studying and stuff. But I regret not being tagged with somebody that had a good university education. I did latterly. Sure. I went back to university latterly and got an education, if you like, but I was always an academic. So for me to come from O-levels and higher straight into work was almost against what I was trying to be. I was trying to be well educated, first of all, and a bit more cultured. And I thought I should stay in education for a while, but nowadays it was just not an option. You know, my father was a heavy drinker and spent most of the money. He used to buy everybody in the pub a drink on a Monday and give us a £5 for the week for the food. So me and Karen became like a wee married couple, where Karen would count the pennies and I would earn the pennies, and we would scrape together meals for the rest of the week. So I had to go out to work. There was no question of me going for an education.
But looking back on it, do you think you'd be in the same position now if you did go to university? Do I? That's a hard one to answer, because I went to going out to work with a good work ethic I had, and I need to move myself on, was probably a good thing at the time. And going back later years to I got a master's in corporate leadership between Napier University and Emory University in Atlanta, which was quite exotic. I can't say that going to university would have changed my focus. I get asked this sometimes, and I think, would I have went down the traditional route of academia, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or something like that? That's probably what would have happened. So yeah, it would have changed my journey quite somewhat. Because getting into business for me wasn't really based on academia. I learnt a wee bit about corporate leadership later on in my life. It was about bootstrapping myself into something. It was about using the skills and the character building stuff I'd learned for growing up in Easterhouse, and that's what got my business going. It wasn't academia. So yeah, I think I would have probably ended up more academic-led career, like a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, to be honest. It's interesting you still say you regret it, though.
Yeah, I do. I think as you get older in life and you put a lot of value in education of your children, for example, I'm big on education and healthcare in my children, so I think it's hard to do both these days, much harder than it was before. To get a good education now is different from when I grew up, because it was far harder work when I grew up, and there was far more expectation, and industries were recruiting people because of their academic qualifications. And nowadays it seems that universities become disconnected with the real world of working. And so a lot of people come out with a university degree which is largely irrelevant in the working space now. And there was a period of time where working environments were trying to knit themselves more integrated with university to try to create students coming out that had relevant experience. But I just see university now as, it seems, I'm not saying it's easier to get a good education, but they don't seem to work as hard as we had to work back then. And I think the bit I regret is not necessarily been tagged with being a Glasgow Uni alumni or anything. It's a discipline. It's a discipline of that constant need to study and have a social life at the same time. I was never very social, and I kind of regret losing out in that experience, I suppose. I don't think it would have impacted. It would have probably negatively impacted where I am just now, if I'm being honest.
But then the experiences you're getting nowadays because of the path you did take, a lot of people would never get them. that went to university.
No, and that's true. I mean, university doesn't necessarily any education doesn't necessarily guarantee your ability to earn. The two of them are totally disconnected. You know, a lot of the really bright people that have done really bright research type based things don't earn a lot of money. So you've got to love it for that reason. I wasn't really driven by the money. I mean, I've ended up, you know, becoming unbelievably wealthy, I suppose, compared to what my expectations were. But it wasn't what drove me. It was never money that drove me. It was money to a certain extent. I don't want to be false by saying it was not. You have to get to a point where you feel stable.
Aye.
And you don't have to chase, you know, mortgages and all that kind of stuff anymore. And that's very satisfying when you get there. And so I guess in the early days it was about getting there. But now I got there quite a while ago. It's really about what I do with that wealth. You know, it's a bit like in your younger days as a man, it's all about providing for your family and earning and making sure they're stable. And when you get there, it's all about what can I do with this? Can I create some sort of legacy, or can I put it to work for good use? And your rationale changes, if you like, you know. So I do regret not being able to say I went to Glasgow Uni or Strathclyde Uni or something like that. But it didn't. I don't regret it for the reasons you think I might regret it, is that I thought I could have done better. How could I have done better with an education like that? And I went back years later and I studied, I've got a master's degree in corporate leadership, but I was always very academic. Sure. And here's where the drive and the survival comes out. I always had to be top of the class. You know, so when I was doing my degree in corporate leadership, I ended up with a first class honours with distinction. Why? Because I just had to. Because it was better than anybody else in my group. I had to be better than anybody else in my group. I don't really know where that comes from, but I couldn't accept anybody in my class getting a better outcome from my degree than I had. And so I just worked and worked and worked until I got there, you know.
It's interesting. You mentioned stability there a little bit before. Do you feel stable now?
Financially, yes. I'll tell you what I'm wrestling with is that at 61, having done what I've done, I should be taking a step back, really. And me and Ali talk about this all the time. It scares me a wee bit to take a step back because I think a lot of longevity. I study a lot about longevity, and you know, I read a great book called Why We Sleep, which started off with why we sleep and ended up in a book about how to make your life longer. And a lot of the message that came out was something that I recognise as a strong sense of purpose for me is the thing that gives you the best chance at longevity. And so I worry a wee bit about stepping back. And so I suppose that's quite uncertain. Do I feel stable financially? Absolutely. Do I feel stable in my relationship and emotionally? Tremendous. I'm very happy where I am, very comfortable in my own skin. I'm wondering what I'll do going forward in terms of just stepping back a wee bit, because it's very hard for me to envisage stepping back. I'm more of a strategist now than I am a doer, to be honest, and that will probably allow me to step back to a comfortable place. But yeah, I feel pretty stable. What's uncomfortable is not how I feel. What makes me uncomfortable is, I'll take these glasses off just now. What makes me uncomfortable is the world that my kids face, to be honest, because the world's a far more dangerous and unpredictable place now than at any time in my entire life. And so my main worry is not about myself. My main worry is about what environment my kids and grandkids are going to be in. And that's unsettling a wee bit. I think that unsettles me a wee bit, and I'm trying to figure it out for them, which you could argue I don't need to. It's up to them to figure that out. But I'm just that kind of father. I want to figure out a safe path for them and use what I've got in order to create that, you know. That's the kind of thing. So yeah, stable, comfortable in my own skin, happy with where I'm at. I'm no less ambitious than I ever was. I'm probably one of the hardest workers in my business, which is not a thing I should be saying at 61, to be honest. But I try to find balance by being able to take off and do really exotic things at the various nice places we've got, to say, well, it's okay to work hard because I get this. And there's a lot of people work hard and don't get that. You know, they have to work hard just to survive. So I'm very respectful of the fact that I can choose to work hard or choose not to work hard, and it's not really going to affect me that much.
I think keeping busy and keeping a purpose keeps you young, and it keeps you sharp. And I've seen a lot of people that have stepped away from business or stepped away from jobs, and you can tell they get slower. They aren't as kind of driven, motivated. And I think a lot of it stems from social circles. Like the number one predictor of a longer life isn't smoking 20 cigarettes a day. It's not drinking. It's your social circle.
Yeah.
But what happens? Yeah. But what happens when you work is your social circle is your work. So when you step away from your job, you're not just stepping away from the job. You're removing yourself from the social circle.
Well, you know, the most amazing thing, I read a book, I think one time back home, I'm trying to remember the name of it now, but It's funny, I'm going to tell you how sharp I am and I can't remember the name of the book I wrote. But,
well, at least you're reading.
That I read, I should say. But I read a book that talked about, humans thrive because we got together in groups and started gossiping and started telling stories and started socialising. And that's what made humans the organised, sort of educated race that we are compared to all other animals, if you like. But you understand that. You always think, I think you always think your longevity is a healthier heart and a healthier body and whether you're eating right and all that kind of stuff. But really for me, it's about the mind and your microbiome and your gut, So you've got to keep the two healthy. Mm-hmm. And you keep the two healthy by doing exactly the things you're talking about. I mean, one of the dangers is, if you're like me, I mean, I have a social circle that's very concentrated in my business, but I also got a very small social circle outside of that. There's probably 20 people that I would say I love as friends and I enjoy their company and I can't wait to see. But it's that small, I don't regard anybody else as necessarily close friends. They're more associates and everything else. And I'm in fire when I'm in their company. I would tell you that. When I'm in their company, I light up. I say I do a wee bit of singing and they all sing and we have great times together. But my life is all about now making memories with my family and my close circle of friends, and I think that invigorates you and keeps you alive. And it's kind of funny because after thousands of years of being human beings, we've still not really figured out what the healthiest path is. Mm-hmm. There's millions of different variations of what you should do to keep healthy. But for me, it's all about sense of purpose. And I can tell you that I kind of stepped down from SMS in 2013, come off the board, because at that time I was fighting against having launched a public company and being a very private man. And I didn't like everybody knowing my wealth profile and all that kind of stuff. And so I done a deal with the board that says, okay, we're floating in 2011. I want to step down in 2013. And I stepped down, still was a major shareholder, but stepped down. And then for the next 4 or 5 years, I didn't really do anything. I was kind of working in the premise that let's not do anything for a couple of years. Something will grab me, right? And I got to 2018 and Alice said, you need a project. You need a project. You're driving me around the bend. You're driving yourself around the bend. You need a project. And since that project became bigger than I ever thought it was, it started with the hotel development, it then became the basketball and play sport and so on and so forth. So I've bitten off a wee bit more than I can chew. But I can tell you that I'm sharper now mentally than I've been for many, many years, So in 2013, 14, 15, I was getting a bit dittery. People were saying to me, you forgot, I just told you that, and so on and so forth. You recognising yourself, you're getting a bit dittery. Now I can remember every member of my staff's names in the whole hotel. I could walk about and go, hi, how you doing? How you doing? And talk to them like I know them. And that's very unusual for me. I'm not great with names, but I can see that I'm much sharper mentally than I ever have been because I've launched myself back into this work and activity and I've not become isolated, So it plays a big part in your longevity, I think, your mental health.
And then going back to the start of the career with the smart meter, how did that come about? Because it's super interesting to me. Now, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube or on Spotify, the video player on Spotify, you might have noticed that Steve has a pretty incredible watch on. This is a Vacheron Constantin, and actually, you can get them through our sponsors, Chisholm Hunter. Chisholm Hunter have been going for over 165 years, and they're still family-run to this day. And to find a family-run business in today's day and age it's few and far between. It doesn't really happen very often. So I, for one, love Chisholm Hunter. Whenever I'm buying a new luxury watch, whether that's a Tudor, a Tag Heuer, Vacheron Constantin, I can't quite get there at the moment, but maybe one day, or a Tissot, whatever it might be, I go to Chisholm Hunter. They're authorized retailers for all of the brands that I just listed and many, many more, and they're actually world renowned for their luxury diamonds. Now, if you're wanting something for yourself or a loved one, head to Chisholm Hunter, but don't just head there, use this discount code for selected lines. This is just to say a thank you for supporting the podcast. You get 10% off selected lines with the discount code CHSUB. That's CHSUB on the chisholmhunter.co.uk website, chisholmhunter.co.uk, or if you want, you can just go into one of the 30 boutiques throughout the UK and say the discount code and you can see if it's applicable on that product. This is just to say a huge thank you for supporting the podcast and a huge thanks to Chisholm Hunter for sponsoring it. So that's CHSUB on the chisholmhunter.co.uk website. That's CHSUB on the chisholmhunter.co.uk website. And without further ado, let's get back to talking to Steve.
Well, it's interesting because it became what they call these days a unicorn, isn't it? Because I could claim to have built a unicorn. But really, I mean, I always laugh that in my first day of employment with British Gas, I fitted a gas meter. And my last day of employment with SMS, we were fitting millions of gas meters. So my life never changed. It was pretty dull, really. But But I know, it's amazing. But the interesting thing is I started life as a gas engineer, as an apprentice with British Gas on what's called the Student Technician Engineer Scheme, which meant we were selected as the kind of special. You weren't an apprentice, you were an apprentice senior manager. And I had a great career with them, but I got to the point where I was a senior engineer and quite young as a senior engineer. And I remember a chap, I looked across the room one day and I could see one of the senior engineers who I was now at the same level as, who was much older than me. He was 41 at the time, actually, I remember that. And I remember that because he was fast asleep at his desk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought, Christ, if I end up fast asleep at my desk at 41, what kind of life am I going to have? I don't want that. He was a nice guy. He actually came to work with me after that, but he was a nice guy, but he just reflected what that culture was like. And so it created again this drive in me to say, I don't want a life like that. It was a bit like a parallel with back to Easter House days. I was looking at it thinking, this is not what I want, you know. And at that time I was earning an okay salary, but I was working for somebody, you know. And British Gas, you were mollycoddled. They were all about training. It was like a training academy almost. I mean, it was a great place to work because of the training and all the personal development you got. But I looked at them and I thought, I don't want that, you know, that I've got to get out of there. And so at the same time, the breakup of the monopoly that was called British Gas was happening. And I was watching people that had no clue about gas engineering make millions of pounds. You know, there was brokers. Because the way they broke it up is they said, right, British Gas buys all the gas from the North Sea. So we're going to stop them buying all the gas for the North Sea and they have to put some of that gas on the market for you to buy. But to allow you to be competitive with them, they have to declare what prices they're selling the gas at to their customers. It's bonkers, eh? It was almost a deliberate attempt to take business away from them. And I watched all these brokers who were buying gas at the North Sea and trying to sell gas at consumers who knew nothing about the gas industry, nothing. And they were making millions of pounds. And I thought, that's not right. And so I asked for redundancy and my boss said, big boss said, not a chance, you're one of the guys for the future, we're not letting you go. And my immediate boss, who used to sit and look out the window most of the day, it was quite funny because we used to dangle things down at the floor above just to annoy him. He was quite a powerful man, but he was just bored with his life, you know. He used to look out the window all the time and I went into him and says, anyway, you can get me out here and give him a redundancy. And he goes, what are you thinking? And I explained to him what I've just explained to you and he said, yeah, let me go and speak to a chap at the time is called John Geddes. I will tell you another wee story about John Geddes because it taught me a lifelong thing that I've spoke about in the past. So remind me to come back to that. But Victor, his name was my immediate boss, and he says, I'll get you out. And he went to see John Geddes and come back and says, I'm going to let you go. Highly unusual, but going to let you go. And I went from there to Shell Gas Direct, and Shell wanted me to sell gas and oil to the northern part of their country under the illusion that they thought a Scotsman would get better sales than a Polish guy that was already there. Because they thought, well, this is honest to God, they thought, Scotsman, he'll go along to the meeting, he'll be wearing a kilt, another Scotsman will buy off them. Honest to God.
Have haggis.
You know, when I asked this Polish guy who was handing over to me, why a Scotsman? He says, because, he said, what's your kilt? And I had a very funny story when he took me to see the Earl of Weems, who was a big customer of ours at Shell. And he said, now, we're going in to see Earl Weems. He's a big whiskey guy, he said. We're going to drink whiskey at his hotel, the Weems Bay Hotel. We'll pay the bill. But he'll talk you through the whiskey thing and you can have a good chat with him. And the next day we'll go up and we'll sign a deal that's 20% above the market rate. That's the way it works. I says, all right, okay. I don't drink whiskey. He says, what? I don't drink whiskey. I said, my father was an alcoholic. I don't drink whiskey. He says, you don't drink whiskey? You're Scotch? I says, no, I don't drink whiskey. I drink vodka. He says, Steve, you've got to drink whiskey. This guy will be offended. And so people ask me why I started drinking whiskey because I'm a big whiskey drinker now. And the reason I started drinking whiskey is we went to that meeting the next day and this guy started in Orkney and finished in Berlin. 61 whiskies at the time. Wee tiny drops of whiskey. And he made us drink every one. And I was ill for 3 weeks after it. But I made up my mind if I was going to have this guy as a client, I need to start drinking whiskey. And that's why I started drinking whiskey. Right? So the Earl of Weems taught me to drink whiskey. And but they put me in Shell Gas Direct thinking a Scotsman, a kilt-wearing Scotsman will get great sales. And when they realised I don't drink whiskey and neither do all Scotsmen wear kilts, they were a bit alarmed. But it taught me over the next 3 or 4 years what competition was like. Because you were a monopoly in British Gas, you never get exposed to how hard life was to make it work in business. And I was in there for 3 years and my boss at that time came to me and said, well, I want to move you out to Texas to the trading floor. We think you've got talents for trading and stuff. And I says, I'm not going to Texas. I got a nosebleed when I go to the end of the street. I'm Feaster House. You can't take me out of the place, you know, you can't take me out of Scotland. And he laughed because he said, this is the biggest opportunity anybody ever gets offered. And you're saying no. I says, I don't want to go to Texas. That's scary. I don't want to go to Texas. He says, what do you want to do? I says, well, I've been watching all these guys earning money selling gas. I want to start my own company. And the guy said to me at the time, okay. He says, he was a very high hedging and share. Was on about 200 grand a year 30 years ago. You know, it was a major deal. And he says to me, I regret never starting my own company. He says, so not only am I going to let you go, he said, I'm going to give you your first contract. It'll be £100,000 a year and you could do all your technical stuff for Shell.
Wow.
Well, that was like, wow. Wow. Amazing. So I was able to leave there, start a consultancy business, consulting to Shell Gas Direct on the technical side of the business. And at that time, because there was so many people that were in the gas industry that didn't have technical knowledge, the government then said, well, if you're going to sell gas, you have to then give them technical support, because you're not just selling gas and leaving people in the lurch when it comes to needing new gas meters and stuff. And so I built original business in SMS called Eco European Limited. And that was delivering technical services to gas suppliers, because a lot of them didn't have any technical engineering. And I would go in and say, okay, I'll take care of providing gas pipelines and gas meters for your clients, and you just keep selling gas to them. It was a good deal. And I built up a whole range of customers on that basis. And then what happened is I would build pipelines and build meters, and I would sell them off to asset managers who would buy them from me. So it was a good lucrative business. I would build it for maybe £50,000 and they would pay me £100,000. So it was very cash positive. And somebody says to me one day, wouldn't it be amazing if you had money, you could just keep all these assets for yourself, because they're making a lot of money buying the assets off you at double the price. So I'm then thinking, if I could build them for half the price and keep the asset, I'm 4 times as rich as they are. And so we decided to go to Ofgem and say, how about we introduce competition to gas metering, the ownership of meters? And they said, no, it's a natural monopoly. I says, well, what's a natural monopoly? They says, well, we can't really see any way that could be open to competition because of the systems that you need to transfer gas suppliers' invoices for one gas supplier to the next as people change on the same asset. And I says, well, give me 6 months. If I could build a system that shows you that I can do that, would you open the market to competition? And he goes, yeah. So we went away, spoke to a chap who ran a sort of development company based in India. And I said, this is what I need. I need this basic system. Brought an Australian guy in who was a bit mad, but he was a genius, really, to be honest. And he, without any knowledge of the gas industry, without ever having been utilities, built this metering management system for me, an asset management system that allowed me to own meters. But the minute somebody switched their gas supplier from Scottish Gas to Centrica, then there would be a wee flag. It would change the invoicing of the system to them at 9 o'clock on a Friday, right? And amazingly, nobody else could build that. For anybody else to build that were producing meters, one of the biggest threats to us was somebody that was manufacturing meters. Mm-hmm. They were big companies, so it would be like £20 million in 5 years to build that system. At some point, I'll tell you how I get the money to build the system. I probably won't talk about it now because it was based in British Gas, being very inefficient, that fed me with money they never ever get back, and I used that to build a system. Hell, I might just tell you about it. It's an interesting story. I don't think they'll sue me now. But the interesting thing is that we went back with that system to Ofgem, and they said, good God, I cannot believe you built that system. This is great. We could introduce competition to the ownership of meters. And we're going to go live in June 2004. It was 2 years away. And so we spent the next 2 years getting ready for that. And what subsequently happened, everybody asked me how difficult it is to compete with British Gas. Well, the same thing happened as happened with gas supply. British Gas were told to lose market share in meters by Ofgem. Otherwise, they would get hit with the monopoly issues that they had, breach of the market and all that. And they used to phone me up and say, listen, we've got 300 meters we do with a whiskey distillery or some other business. Do you want to bid for it? And I would say, well, how much are you bidding for it? And they would say, well, our price is X. And I would just go in and undercut that, and I would get the business. So we grew our custom quite a lot in the commercial side. And then we landed a domestic supplier, and that involved millions of meters, and we couldn't afford to do that ourselves. So the interesting thing is, in all the years about the business, I never had an overdraft. I was always cash positive. And my first borrowing was 500 million in a syndicated bank loan. Which Barclays led.
What?
And we got our first ever borrowing was against a 500 million facility done with a syndicate of banks, because they recognised that a gas meter was a very stable asset.
Right.
It's a bit like owning the Cisco and Sun Microsystems part of the internet. It doesn't matter what the internet does. The pipelines and cables that carry the data are what you invest in, and that's what we had. So investing in meters, we had the bit that carried the gas into the meter, and then people used it. But because we were renting the meter out, it didn't matter if people stopped using it or started using it or used more or used less. We get the same money for the meter. So it was a very stable asset, and that's essentially how we got into gas meters, which then became the business that sold for 1.3 billion to KKR just a few years ago, actually. And it started off just because of my technical knowledge of being an engineer, being able to transfer that into my first time having a business, which is technical service to gas suppliers. But because I was a gas supplier, because I was an engineer, I had a good breadth of expertise to take it to the next level.
Sure.
And that opened the door for us. Beyond that, I never had a great strategy to sell it to KKR for 1.3 billion, to be honest. It was just good decisions, better than bad decisions as we went, and it seemed to start going the right direction until we then got an opportunity to list the company in the stock exchange, or to go down a private equity route. And one of the things people don't know is I had a board of very important people, real big hitters in business, that wanted us to go down the private equity route. And I just felt like they were driving me down that route so they would get something out of it. Because
all right, so their own agenda was at play.
Without a doubt. I mean, I don't hold it against them because, they got involved in the business. I guess it helped steer us a wee bit and give us a bit of belief we can do something big. The problem was that they knew if we floated the business, they wouldn't get any equity, because independent directors are not allowed to have equity in a listed business. Whereas they knew if they go down the private equity route, they could have a fair chunk of equity. And I just felt that listing the business in a stock exchange was the right thing to do for us, because in my view, you get a better multiple on the value of the business. And 3 weeks before we were going to market, I fired my board, which my brokers were thinking, Jesus Christ, Steve, we're 3 weeks away from launching this listing and you've just fired your board. I says, well, I have to. I have to. And so we knocked things together again. We went to London, spent 3 weeks in London. The third week they told me they were going to pull a plug on it, because the market was going against us, and there was 6 people doing IPO rounds and 5 of them had pulled out. We were the only show in town. And I says, well, I've been 3 weeks away from my family, and if you pull out now, we'll never work with you again. So you do what you need to do to get me a listing. And they said, we're going to put another 30 meetings in the diary. There was a company called Senkos who were brilliant, hard-working people. And they did put another 30 meetings in the diary, and we got it away for a valuation of about £40 million, which was tremendous work, really tremendous work for them. And we just built it from there. It went from good to great from that point, and ended up selling for 1.3 billion, which is quite an astronomical. I mean, I think most of the growth happened when I left. So maybe me getting out of the way.
The foundations for it. The tectonic plate there was yourself.
I mean, the foundations were a real thing there. We did a number of things. We got in first to all the gas suppliers. The dog's having a wee snooze already.
Just anyone listening, that is a dog snoring.
Yeah, it's not my tummy, it's the dog. But the great thing there is that we got in first mover advantage, where we strategized that if we get in first with a gas supplier would not want multiple meter operators, because then they would have to have multiple relationships.
Right, so they just wanted one.
Yeah, so we went to them and said, okay, you want away from British Gas, what if we give you a meter operator where anybody else that approaches you has to be subbed to us? In other words, we'll manage that relationship for you, but they have to come in through us. And they thought that was a great idea. It was brilliant for us, because we then said, in order to do that, we need an in perpetuity contract, a contract that never ends. That's unheard of in the utility industry. But the rationale was, if you want us to compete with British Gas, we have to have an in perpetuity contract to raise funds for the bank. And they went with that. And so
they were signing in perpetuity?
In perpetuity contracts. To this day, in perpetuity contracts. What that means is, when a gas meter came to the end of its useful life, we have the right to roll over to another gas meter and stay with them for that gas meter asset.
Forever.
Right? And they didn't see it as a particularly difficult thing, because if a gas meter changed to another gas operator, gas supplier, then that obligation rolled over to the other gas supplier. So they weren't naturally saying, we'll stay with you for good. They were saying the meter will stay with you for good, irrespective of who owns it.
Okay, that makes sense. When you went through that experience and kind of building the foundations and the tectonic plate in which it then sold for 1.3 billion, what were the lessons that you think you learned, the most important lessons?
I think the first thing is that, see, as an entrepreneur, the biggest challenge is knowing when you have to step back, right? And so I guess my skills come into play to get those in perpetuity contracts, to get those first few contracts, because then perpetuity contracts helped us to keep everybody else at bay. If they tried to challenge us, the gas supplier would simply point them to us and say, no, you need to sort it out with them. And so we would go to them and say, we'll take your meters out, or you can sell them to us. You can sell them to us, or we'll take them out, either way. So we built our portfolio off a lot of that. But at some point, I get bored, I I was kind of thinking, okay, I've put all this in place. It's just a big grind wheel now. It's just about getting from 1 metre to 1 million metres to 2 million metres to 3 million metres. And that's not interesting enough for me. I've got a terrible attention span and I get bored easy, you know. Just why sit in the house with a sore eye this week? I've been crazy trying to get out of the house because I get bored easy. But I had to know, and I think every entrepreneur has to know when it's not time to be entrepreneurial with your business. It's about, you know, nose to the grind wheel. And I brought a chap in called Alan Foy from Scottish Power. Great guy, really, really bright, intelligent, knew all the detail of the business. And I knew he was a guy to run the business after that point because I was still trying to create new businesses all the time. And Alan, I kind of put in charge when I left in 2013. I stepped down for the board and he did a magnificent job of just nose to the grind wheel and building a business into without being distracted too much, you know. The big failure we had, and I should be dead proud, shouldn't I, that we sold it to KKR for 1.3 billion, but Alice says to me on the day it happened, because I fought it off as a hostile. I fought it off first of all as a scheme, and they approached me and said, well, we're going to change it to a hostile takeover and we only need 51% for that, and I knew I was beat. So I kind of done a wee deal with them. But Alice says to me at the time, you know, anybody else would be celebrating and doing cartwheels at selling a business for 1.3 billion. She says, you look a bit strange. And it was a wee bit because I knew we could have sold it for 4 billion. Because what happened is, you know, Alan, unfortunately, his wife took ill and he subsequently lost his wife, who were both good friends of ours. And Alan had to step down on the day because his wife took ill. And he's that kind of guy. It was like, family's in trouble, I'm out of here. And we had to put another guy in place who I just don't think was ready. And he made the fatal mistake of worrying too much about the price of the stock on the market rather than the fundamentals of the business. And that screwed us, to be honest with you. So when KKR came in, he was just relieved to be selling it. Whereas we were saying, another 2 or 3 years, it's a £4 billion business. So I felt a wee bit cheated. And I almost stepped back in. I was talking to advisors about stepping back in and taking the business private myself. And then Alice said to me, you don't really want that kind of 100-hour a week again, do you? And so I satisfied myself that getting a business to 1.3 billion was probably something to be proud of. And
Probably.
I should accept it. Probably, you know. Just because I felt a wee bit cheated. But there was also a wee bit of, I lost my baby. You know, a wee bit of, I created this from a £5,000 grant in my loft. And I'll never forget that because I was pacing up and down taking a phone call and I fell through my loft and broke my ribs. Never missed a beat in the phone call. But so I started from my loft, so you become attached to it. And for me, you know, I'm all about the people in the business. For me, a business is built because you look after your people, they look after your customers, that looks after your balance sheet. And unfortunately, the guy that was left in charge looked at the balance sheet first. And it became quite an unhappy place to work and customers were quite unhappy. And his escape route was to sell it off to KKR. And I just got on the wrong side of hedge fund people who hated me because a few years before, when the short sellers were trying to short sell a stock, I bought back in and it cost them a lot of money. So the short sellers, I think I'm told the short sellers cost them £300 million because I bought back in, and when they seen the founder buying back in, there was a newfound confidence in the stock and it started to go up again. And so they were after me, I suppose, when it came to sell it, and a lot of the people that were siding with KKR made it untenable for me to fight it, and I just let it go. But again, it's if I had that more energy back at the time it was floating, I would have kept it and got it to 4 billion and sold it, because I always had ambition to get into 4 billion. I don't know why that figure. Incidentally, I just thought it was a 4 billion company, and I would have loved to have got it there, but I was a wee bit too old by that time and didn't really want to step back into a fight like that. But I almost did. I had the advisors lined up to take it private again. I spoke to Alan, who was, you know, still grieving the loss of his wife, and he said, well, whatever you decide, I'll go with. And I thought it was quite honourable of him to put his trust back in me, you know. But in essence, I thought the best thing to do was let it go for that money and settle for that, you know, and got on with my life kind of thing. So.
You mentioned Ali a lot there. Where does she fit into this?
Oh, I mean, it's well known that, you know, it's not, I wouldn't advise most people to get into business with their wife, to be honest. It's a stress. And it is a stress. It's not a bed of roses all the time. But Ali's got, you know, Ali started off life as an accountant. That's how I met her. She was an accountant in my firm. And you wouldn't believe she's an accountant to see her now. She's a most amazing visionary. I mean, she can literally, the thing I can't get my head around is she could look at a plan or to look at an empty space and visualise it literally as if it's really there. And that's what she done with the castle initially. She walked into this rat-infested, derelict building. And I walked the other way. and she's in there with an agent guy, and I'm like, where is she? And I was actually worried she'd fallen through the floor because they were away for an hour, and they came back out. I says, what are you thinking about? It's a dangerous building. You shouldn't be in it at all. She goes, this is going to be the most amazing event space. And I was like, Jesus, she can't be serious. I thought by the time we got home, she'd have talked herself out it. But she's a tremendous visionary, and we've seen something almost growing, Ali, that nobody could have seen years ago, is that she's got a tremendous vision, but it's a unique way to visualise stuff because she doesn't visualise it from her own perspective. She can actually literally look at an empty space and walk through it as a customer walks through it. So whenever you hear her talking to her advisors and stuff, you'll see her talking like she's talking as a customer. Yeah, but if I walk through here and I see that first, that's not going to be a great experience for me. And you listen to her and you think, how can you do that? Because I look at a plan and I see black and white lines in a drawing, and I can't until it's done. I mean, I'm famous for, she starts a bit of the project and I won't go to see it until it's nearly finished, because she'll say things to me and and I'm like, I can't see that, Ali. I can't see that. It just annoys me. So I'd rather see it when it was finished. And so she's become this creative genius that deeply cares about what she's doing. She deeply cares about getting it right. I mean, more than anybody else, she punishes herself if she does something wrong. When I'm saying to her, but customers won't see that. She said, but it doesn't matter, but I can see it,
Sure.
And so I guess the complimentary bit of, you can really see it coming out in the hotel just now since we've taken over for the agent we have running it. Is Ali's very focused on creating spaces that can create magic, and I'm very focused on creating systems and engineering behind the scenes that allow people to focus on that and don't get distracted from it.
Interesting you say that. Have you ever heard of the Michelangelo effect?
No, I don't think so.
So it's essentially when a partner or a friend, you're very close with them and they see the best in you and try and bring out the best in you. And they do that both ways. So the sum of the two is much better than the one.
That's interesting.
And that's what I can see there, because she knows that you're more into the technical side of things, whereas she's more into the artistic and visionary side of things, and you can bring the best out of each other and you both rise together. Yeah,
I mean, it's frustrating sometimes because Ali will want me to look at more detail and I want her to look more at systems, and we kind of go, no, that's not our bag.
Sure.
It's funny you say the Michelangelo effect, because there's a similar concept that I talk a lot about when I used to do the kind of entrepreneur talks, is that how Michelangelo created the statue of David. And it's, he looked at an 8x5 block of marble and he could see David in it, but he just chipped away the stuff on the outside. And that for me is how you visualise a business. I can look at a business and see what I want to create out of it, and it's just a case of chipping away at it. Well, Ali does the same thing with spaces. She can look at a space and see the space, and then she just knocks all the stuff out the way and creates this amazing, beautiful space. And if you look at everything she's created in the hotel and stuff, it's on the eye, it's magnificent. But the thing that people understand early doors is it doesn't look good. It flows right. The purpose is there. She's thought everything where the kitchens are relative to the eating spaces. She's got the ability not just to visualise it, but visualise it as a client. Imagine what would be a pain point for a client and take it out of the way. So, I mean, architects love her, because architects usually have to come up with stuff to impress you, whereas architects just do what they're told and they go, right, Ali knows what she wants, so I'll just draw it and we'll get to working together with them. So she's an incredible visionary. But the thing that keeps her pure is she deeply cares about getting it right. She really kicks herself if she gets it wrong. I think more than she has to. But she's always seeking perfection, whereas I'm behind the scenes building systems and putting processes in place to make sure that people stick to what she's created.
Well, it's a little bit like her baby, right? It's like when you build a business, you're always going to care more than anybody else about the business because you are a director, or you are the director. And I think a common mistake that people make in business is that they expect others to care as much as they do when they're in the senior or the top of the business.
It's interesting. Many years ago, when I studied my master's degree in Emory University in Atlanta, I came back with this thing that I should create a grand vision and everybody should buy into it. And I spent years trying to get everybody from the top to the bottom to buy into my vision. And one of the lecturers at the time said to me, Steve, you don't need everybody to buy into your vision. You need a critical mass of people to buy into your vision. That's what it is. A critical mass is what you're aiming for. So you need enough people to buy into your vision to drive it. But there's people just turn up at work and want to be told what to do. They don't want to engage in a vision. It's not their bag, right? I thought everybody would be totally inspired and go, let's go. And I learned very early on there's certain people like that, and you have to know who those people are. And there's a thing I do in business that Laura will be familiar with. You don't want to be called a can't in business with me. You do not want to be called a can't. And how you get to be called a can't is if a wee saying you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And I'll say, this is what we want to do. Mm-hmm. And I could tell with the people in the room, they'll go, right, I'll figure that bit out. Right, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Yeah, let's figure it out. But there's always one or two people in the room that say, here's why you can't do that. You know, you have to overcome this. You have to do that. What are you going to do with that customer? What are you going to do with legislators? What are you going to do if... And they give me 10 reasons why not to do something. And I'm well known for having one reason to do something and crossing that bridge when I come to it, because that's how I built SMS. We didn't know how to create a marketing business, meeting business. We just says we want to do it, and then we figured out some hefty blockers on the way. But if you consistently say to me, but, then I'm probably going to say, I can't. And nobody likes being called a can't, because I come from Easterhouse. They know there's not much of a difference between can't and what I'm really thinking. And you don't want to be called out in my business. And I was doing a Better Man talk a couple of weeks ago, and Ross Anderson, who runs Better Man's a tremendous guy, really, really visionary guy. He reminds me a wee bit of myself in terms of what he's doing, and focused on men rather than women, which I think is brave, because lots of people saying you're doing a Better Man, what about the women? He's like, no, I'm focusing on men. Right, but he gave me a wee thing after I did my talk, and it's a wee plaque, and it's a wee fork, and it says on it, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And on the fork is engraved, don't be a can't. And I'm going to stick it up on the wall. And the reason they gave me a fork is because I talked about the big sword, the sword I'm wearing here. I talked about the big sword, and it says that's a fork to go with your knife, you know, which I thought was quite clever. But my view to get forward in life is, you know, if you don't believe in what I'm doing, just get out of the way and let me do it. You know, just step out the way. I'll deal with you later. Just step out the way. And that to me is what drives you. You just have to have one good idea, and then you always find out. People give up on great ideas because people put them down. You know, they always say when you're at the top of your business as an entrepreneur, it's a lonely place to be. Well, there's a reason it's lonely. It's not because you're working yourself. You're working with lots of people. The lonely bit from entrepreneurism comes from that you have to carry the burden of your vision for a long time before anybody else sees it.
That's interesting.
You know, it's a bit like you have this vision of, I'm doing it with a lot of the business just now, particularly the basketball. I have this vision about the basketball, which will become a lonely experience for me, because as I try to sell it to the world that has to help me facilitate it, the world of people, then you feel very alone, because you're describing something they can't get their head around, they can't buy into. And it's your determination and your dogged sense of I need to get this done that eventually gets them thinking maybe he's got something here, and then when they see it coming together, they're on board. And that's what makes what I do lonely, in the sense that you're pursuing this vision that nobody else really sees. It's almost, I mean, I guess I'm lucky enough to be able to develop a vision around about it, but it's almost difficult to live with a lot of the time, because I can't do anything simple. I mean, I'm known in the business as I can't do anything small. You know, I look at something, I think I want to do something really big with this. I want to make the hotel the best guest experience of any hotel in the world. I mean, that's an almighty, lofty ambition, but I think we can do it. Ali thinks we can do it. We're working together to create the magic moments, me to create the systems to allow us to focus on the magic moments. With the basketball, I want to make it groundbreaking move for Scottish sport and Scottish basketball. I'm not satisfied with running a successful club. It's an impediment sometimes, you know. At 61, I've still got that ambition. But that's kind of what drives me. It's wanting to do something that I'm touching as almost a legacy piece, particularly now. In my younger days, it was about earning money to feed the family, to make the family secure and all that. When you get beyond all that, it's how can I create something that will live way beyond my term on this earth, you know, leave a legacy for other people who didn't have the chance, you know. And it's not really about, I'm always careful to say I'm not trying to put back, because I hate when people do that. I want to put something back, and you see these TV programmes where they go back into where they grew up in Easterhouse and they pretend to be somebody else, and they give somebody a cheque, and you're thinking that's such shit. You know, what you're doing is making everybody feel terribly bad. It's just bullshit, and it's based on ego. And I could talk all day about ego, because I hate people with big egos. I spent my life getting rid of people with big egos, which I think is what everybody should do in business, and they'll be successful. But really, for me, creating a legacy, for example, in the basketball, is about creating an opportunity for kids in dark corners of Scotland that have got nothing, to give them something that they can enjoy. They can build a social circle around about, but they can start to believe they can do something great. And that's what basketball is about for me. It's not really about the sport. It's about using the power of that particular sport to convince people they can do something as great as what I've done, or what me and Ali have done together. Because it's within everybody to be able to do something great. It's all about self-belief. It's all about surviving that lonely period when people are shooting your your thing down. You talked about in Scotland. In Scotland, you come up with a grand vision and they're all trying to shoot you down day one. You've got to be pretty tough to say, well, I'll show you I can do this, and you've got to believe that. That's kind of where I am just now, I guess, with that.
I think there's three things there. One is I want to chat to you about ADHD, because I think we're onto a winner there. And then I'll talk to you about the obviously the hotel, the castle, and also the basketball. So was going to ask you about ADHD. What do you know about it, and do you think you might have it?
Well, let me take it back a bit, right? Because when I grew up, there was probably 4 mental illnesses that were documented, and they were all pretty serious, like schizophrenia and all these kind of things.
Sure.
And where I grew up in my family, you weren't allowed to have any mental weakness. That's a thing, wasn't it? I mean, I probably cried in front of another man when I was in my 20s and 30s, and it changed me for the rest of my life, because I found that I'm quite emotional now. I don't mean right now. I mean now as a man, because I'm not embarrassed about crying in front of other men and being emotional. But it took me a long time to get there, because when I grew up, crying was seen as weakness. And so I tell this to everybody. I used to say it to my own kids a lot when they didn't want to go to school in the morning, So, oh, Dad, I'm not feeling well. I would say to my Dad, I'm not feeling well. I don't want to go to school today. And they'd say, no, you're not feeling well. Something wrong with your legs? I says, not my legs are fine. He goes, well, get to fucking school. Right, so that was it. It was unless there's something wrong with your legs, you get to fucking school. Right? And so we had this discussion recently with Ben, and Ben said to me and Ali, "Yous are not very sympathetic to mental health, are you?" And I says, well, so I told him that story about my father. And I says, it's not that we're not sympathetic, son, but when I grew up, there were 4 types of mental health. And now there's, I think last count, there was nearly 80 different types of mental disorder.
Yeah.
And I think that's because the profession grew on the back of creating mental health out of perfectly normal things like anxiety. I mean, who doesn't get anxious now and again? It's a natural part of emotion. But now it's anxiety, and you have to get treated for it, And whatever else you could come up with, they have a name for it now, and they want to treat people for it. And going back to ADHD, Americans are terrible at this kind of thing, right? Because I have a home in America. I love America. But the thing about America is they medicate everything, and they take it to extremes. It's privatised, so it's money-making exercise.
Exactly.
But they create illnesses that don't exist and then medicate you out of them, And it's a bit like the whole thing, I was into keto quite a few years there. And the whole thing is the industries are now co-owned by the same people, the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And the food industry makes you sick, and the pharmaceutical industry medicates you back to health. That's the way things work if you don't fight against it. The shit you can eat off the shelves is terrible for your body. But they've always got a pharmacist waiting to give you something to put you back together again. And then they give you something for the side effects and so on and so forth. It's a masterful business model, but it's corrupt. And so you asked me about ADHD, and I'll tell you this. I do get bored easily, right? I get bored very easily. Ali can't sit me down for 30 minutes to watch something on TV without me sitting on the edge of my seat, because I always think there's something else better I should be doing. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard for me to relax, which is why, because I've had this wee eye problem the last week and I've had to lie down for 45 minutes out of every hour, it's been tearing away at me, because Ali's saying, it's amazing how you've stuck to it. And I've stuck to it because it's my eye, and I don't want to lose my sight. But I've rediscovered that I'm still the same irritable person if I can't get up and do something. So I get bored very easily. Have I got attention deficit disorder? No. Just get bored easily. So I don't think I've got something you can name. But if I was being honest about it, if somebody was to look at me and say, you're not the average person, you lose interest in things very quickly, you can't keep your attention on anything. Strangely enough, unless I love what I'm doing. If I'm playing guitar, I could sit and play guitar for hours. If I'm singing, I could sit and sing for hours. If I'm doing something I truly love, then it's got my attention. And actually, my son Ben's very like that. When Ben again's a bit like me, he's fidgety, he's always wanting to do something, he's always on the go until he's doing something he loves, and then he sits down and does it. We watch him playing piano, which he's taught himself. It's like watching a professional pianist playing it, but he's in the zone. But I don't think we necessarily need to call it anything other than normal human behaviour for somebody with a slightly different personality. So I'm maybe more energetic and more interested in the world. Ali calls me a big sponge. I love knowledge. I love watching things because I've learned something. But here's how I would describe it. If I'm watching something I don't learn anything from, it's the reason I don't read fiction novels. So I don't know if it's right or wrong, but when I'm reading a fiction novel, because it's not teaching me something about real life, I can't read it. I get bored. If I'm reading sort of book, it teaches me about real life diet or anything else, I love it. I'm into it. And it's the same when I watch TV. You know, I'll sit for hours watching TV, YouTube videos on all sorts of interesting topics. But unless you want to sit me down with a series like kind of Yellowstone and stuff like that, because I'm a cowboy and I love all that stuff, then I can't really sit and watch it, because I'm thinking all the time, is this moving me on? Am I learning something? I don't know what you would call that. I don't really think I've got ADHD, but I get bored easily. Let me put it that way.
Well, I think there's a stigma around it that it's a bad thing. And I don't understand why it would be a bad thing to focus on the shit you love instead of the stuff you don't. Like, I don't get the split there. But then I think what's happened is there's an education system that's hundreds of years old, but technology is way surpassed that. So you've got all these subjects that are redundant. Well, you need to be a major in English. I can't remember the last time I wrote something down, because it's all on a laptop.
Nobody writes anymore.
Yeah,
Handwriting's went down the tubes, isn't it?
Exactly. And I understand the skill, and it's important to maintain the skill. But there's subjects in school now that are just redundant. Mathematics, look it up in ChatGPT. It will give you a correct answer 100% of the time instead of 50% like you when you do it yourself. So this education system has been surpassed by technology, and it's not catching up. And I think that's where all these, you've got ADHD because you can't concentrate on English.
ADHD is what developed my character to make me the successful person I am, to be honest with you. It should never be looked as a negative, because the trouble is that our education system is based on teaching a class of 20 or 30 people. Mm-hmm. And so by definition, a teacher has to compromise. A teacher can't be looking after one individual because they've got a different level of skill or a different focus than any other 29 pupils, and the classes get bigger all the time. So our education system is not about identifying and harnessing individuals with talent. It's about giving everybody a minimum level of education. And the bit I referred to earlier is the education system is somewhat now disconnected from the working world. So we're teaching people, as you say, subjects that have no bearing in where you might end up doing things. And actually, the real challenge for the education system is going to be with agentic AI out there now.
Yeah.
Because of what you just said. Because actually, I could still do fairly hefty maths equations and stuff like that. We have a laugh with one of my friends, Carolyn, who's a real maths genius. She's a tutor in maths. But we laugh that at 61 I can still solve a lot of maths equations, because it's just something I loved. I love maths. It's the way my brain works. But now I sometimes play a wee joke on her, which gives me a difficult thing to work on, and I put it into ChatGPT or Claude or something like that, and it gives me the answer, and I pretend I worked it out, you know. and you've got to be careful it doesn't make your mind lazy, but this is the reality. I'm all for grabbing opportunities, right? So in my world, if AI can negate a lot of the education system and focuses on how we can be the most productive and intelligent people in the world, I think that's the right way to go. And the problem is we've got a system that doesn't like change, and people that don't like change, that fight against it, those are the cants I was talking about. You know, we can't do this because, we can't do this because, we can't do this because. Well, we can. If you think about agentic AI, I think it's the biggest opportunity for us to be an amazing country and amazing people. But we're all scared of it. And you see people being scared of it. So I think ADHD is a great thing, because you tend to focus on the big stuff that interests you, and you don't focus on the small stuff. Well, that isn't ADHD. That's a proper productive mind that focuses on the stuff they enjoy and the stuff they really find interesting, but actually doesn't focus on the stuff that they expect us to focus on. And because you don't focus like the rest of your 29 pupils in the class, people select you out and say you've got ADHD. Well, that's bollocks. You're just a different style of individual. You've probably been created for your experience and grown up. And we shouldn't be selecting them out and saying they've got some kind of impediment that we certainly not one we have to drug. I mean, in America, they're trying to give ADHD drugs to 2-3-year-olds, which is horrendous.
It's privatized, though.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Whenever you put money into anything, whether that's news outlets, which are, by the way, I find massively corrupt, anything you put money into, there's always an agenda to make more money. And the agenda for the pharmaceutical companies is, well, if we medicate 3-year-olds, all of a sudden you're opening your bracket, you can medicate 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, why not? And then we make more money. And
there's a good example in that. My doctors will say to me, yeah, I would like to be on statins because my cholesterol's just over the 5 mark. I think it's 6.3 or something. And I've read enough books about statins, probably 15 or 20 books about statins, to know it's one of the most corrupt drugs in the world, you know. There's a great one that an NASA astronaut wrote where he kind of lost his mind almost in an Alzheimer's type way whenever he was on statins. And it's because of the pathway that statins blocks. It also blocks a thing called CQH10, which is an enzyme that your body produces that is essential not just for heart health but brain health. And so when you take a statin to lower your cholesterol, which, by the way, I don't agree, needs to be lowered, because your body produces cholesterol, and if your body's operating properly with a healthy diet, it produces cholesterol, whatever level it is at, in order to keep your body healthy and alive. And so when you take these drugs, the side effects are that it cuts off the pathway to CoQ10. And that affects your brain, affects your heart health, and affects everything else. And there's enough information out there to know that when American pharmaceutical companies are suggesting giving statins to 7 or 8-year-olds, that there's something really corrupt about that. Because statins essentially work to reduce an enzyme that your body naturally produces. And even now, I find that, I think the British Medical Journal came out with something a few years ago saying that high cholesterol is not now an indicator of poor heart health. It's about triglycerides and the ratio of triglycerides, fats in your body. Yet, still to this day, 4 or 5 years after that came out, British Medical Journal, British doctors who should stay up to date with that kind of stuff are still prescribing statins to patients. And my understanding is a statin is a good drug. If you've had a heart attack, there's a measurable effect in preventing you having another. But statins should never be given to anybody that's not had a serious heart problem.
Sure.
And so my doctors kind of got me on statins for love and their money, and they keep on wanting to send me to specialists in London who know more about it than me. But my view is, if every other indicator in my body shows I'm in really good health, then why are you focused on cholesterol? Because everything else flies in the face of that prediction, if you like. And so I'm seen as a wee bit of an outlander in terms of my doctor's advice versus what I do myself. And it's about ADHD. You know, I see a kid who can focus on the things he loves and do really well, but not focus on all the noise that's around about him, as a talent that should be harnessed, not as an illness it should be drugged. And I think that's probably the worst thing about the society, is we take anxiety. You need to feel anxious to get yourself off your arse sometimes, right? So I'm a bit anxious about not doing something I've done. Oh, that gives me drive to go and do something I've done. Now, I'll give you a tablet so the anxiety goes away and the drive goes away at the same time. We're drugging people into zombieism, aren't we, a lot of the time? And so when my kids say you don't really recognise mental health, I recognise when they're stressed, I recognise when they're anxious, I recognise when there's nothing wrong with their legs and they should go to work, you know. But I don't recognise that they should have to seek external medical help for something unless it's something we can't figure out. So I probably am unsympathetic to mental health. Probably comes from the fact that I've been through some very traumatic stuff in my life. Sure. And what I've done with that is used, as any human should, right back to human evolution. When trauma and tragedy was a normal part of life, you survived because you overcame it. You didn't survive because somebody drugged you away from it. So that's my main worry. Is I'm glad we're not really following the kind of American way, because almost every few minutes in American TV, there's adverts about some drug.
Oh, that's totally corrupt.
It's rubbish. And the system they've got over there is they can issue a drug and then you've got to prove it caused you harm. Not that they have to disprove it was going to cause you harm before they issue it. So it's very corrupt. But yeah, ADHD, I probably do have something like it, but I think it's a talent and a skill rather than an impediment.
Yeah. Have you looked into creatine at all?
Creatine?
Yeah, creatine, the powder.
Oh, creatine?
Yeah.
Creatine, I thought it says creating. I'm reasonably creative. Yeah, I mean, I've came across creatine. I used to take creatine, actually.
You still take it or no?
No, I don't now. I don't now for various reasons. I've limited, I used to take, in recent years, I used to take maybe 30 or 40 supplements a day.
Wow.
Yeah, I got into that for a wee while, and I didn't really feel an obvious benefit from doing that. And now I've got high blood pressure and stuff like that, and I take my basic medication for that. And I take 2 vitamins, and it's vitamin K and vitamin D. And I take vitamin K because it helps absorb vitamin D. And I read a great book about vitamin D. And if you think about all these vitamins that you can get, then why would vitamin D not be the most important thing? Because it's the sun that generates that in your body. It's exposure to sunshine that creates your vitamin D levels in your body. And sun gives life to everything on planet Earth, doesn't it? So if you take it right back to basic principles, that tells me that the most important vitamin in my body is vitamin D. And actually, I read some credible articles about the whole COVID episode, where, and I believe this is credible, that we could have easily get through COVID without losing the people we lost if we had given the population free vitamin D. And vitamin D, I think a wee Spanish town proved that vitamin D was a perfect protection against dangerous symptoms of COVID.
Wow.
Yeah, the reason we never got there is because the pharmaceutical companies said that as they can't trademark and they can't protect the issue of vitamin D, it's cheap to give out and you can't copyright or trademark it. then they refused to build vaccines if the government took up that policy. Yeah, it's well known that, and I just had my bloods taken, so my vitamin D is at the very highest level that they say it's safe to be at.
Sure.
Yeah, I take 400 micrograms every day. So does Ali with vitamin K for absorption, and I believe that protects us against all manner of illnesses. I mean, I don't touch wood. I'm not even superstitious. I don't know why I'm saying that, but we don't. I mean, illnesses bounce off me. And I think vitamin D is critical to keeping the chronic illnesses at bay. So I like to have a high level of vitamin D. I stopped taking creatine and resveratrol and all these kind of things I used to take for heart health, just because I thought, let's simplify it. Let's take something every day. And I get my bloods done every year or 2 years, and let's see what the trend is in my bloods, because bloods are a very good indicator of good health.
Yeah.
And we'll then step stuff in. So I take usually vitamin K, vitamin D, sometimes vitamin B. Especially with my eye health at the moment, vitamin B was seen to be lacking a wee bit, and that might protect the problem I've got in my eye, and so I've started taking vitamin B. But I've tend to come back for the 40 supplements a day and go back onto adding them as I could see benefit, as I understand them more.
Well, that's exactly it. I think that the reason that I'm asking about creatine is I've recently got my parents into it, and I did a bunch of research into it. I also had someone on the podcast guest talking about it, but in very, very simple terms, what it does is pushes water to the muscle, and it's a naturally occurring chemical in the body in the first place that a lot of us are kind of lacking. But what it does is it prevents muscle deterioration as you get older as quickly. So if you think when you get older, naturally your muscles start deteriorating, and when you have those muscle deteriorations, what happens as you get older is you might break a hip, you might break a leg, you might break this, and that then causes a huge exponential curve on the issues that you have as you get older. But if you can prevent that, or if you can slow it down, you are preserving your health for longer. He's snoring again. And the interesting thing is that they're now studying the effects on the brain, and they've kind of put it beside a decreased risk of onset of dementia. So because it's pushing water to the parts of the brain, and because it's increasing that kind of flow, they've put it in line with decreasing the risks of dementia as well.
It's really interesting because that's the thing that most people fear. Isn't it? There's one illness to me that's more terrifying than cancer, and that's Alzheimer's or dementia, because actually the toll on the people that love you is incredible. You know, I mind once seeing an image of a chap in wheeled through a hospital with his family behind him. They'd obviously got to see him on a Sunday, and he looked absolutely terrified with the people he loved most in the world, because he didn't know who they were. And actually, I'm big on protecting myself and Ali against dementia and stuff like that, to be honest with you. But I believe a lot of that's sugar in the diet, you know. So a lot of, although I was on a very strict keto diet and I was the healthiest I've ever been in my life, I have to tell you that I was on the diet to go and do an Arctic trek, 7 days in the Arctic.
Wow. Kept that quiet.
I'm not going back to it, I'll tell you that. It was bloody frozen. The thing you realise is that when you're minus 40 degrees for the whole 7 days and you don't get a break because you're out in the wilds for that length of time, as everything freezes and it makes life very hard. I could fully understand why people die in that kind of temperature now. But I had to get fit for that. And I had to get fit because a minor thing here is a major emergency in the Arctic. And so things like I had a wee bit of problem with my gallbladder. I had to get my gallbladder taken out because I thought if you get gallbladder pain, you're getting helicoptered out and all that kind of stuff. So I went on a very strict keto diet. And actually, I'll tell you how I got on the keto diet. I went to see a surgeon in Ireland about a hair transplant, because you won't know this, but I've had 2 hair transplants and I was as bald as anything before I got them done. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's looking great. Because I'm looking at one because I'm going bald.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's only one place to go. It's HRBR clinic in Dublin. And the chap that invented the technique, which is when they take a big bit of skin out your scalp and then they harness it and put it back in there, he brought that technique to the UK.
Right.
And I was sitting talking to him as I went over to do my consultation. And as I was talking to him about my hair transplant, and he really want to get you comfortable with the psychology of what you're doing, right? Sure. And he's chatting to me and he said to me, "You've got a bit of a gut on you there, have you not, Steve?" And I was like, cheeky bastard. You know, I'm here talking about hair transplant, you're telling me about my gut. And I says, I didn't expect you to say that. Why do you say that? He says, "Have you heard of the keto diet?" I says, "No." And he says, "I'm a keto person." And this guy, I have to tell you, is 73 at the time. Was the most amazing looking 73-year-old. His hair, his face, his skin and everything was like, he was a stunning looking man. I don't mean the traditional good looks, but stunningly healthy looking,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
And he said, seeing that shake, it's a couple of raw eggs and so on and so forth. And he then started talking to me about keto diet when I was exploring another diet for going to the Arctic, right? Because I went to him to see about hair transplant before I went, but I wasn't going to get it done until after I come back in case a severe cold had affected it. So I was there with my view on I want to go on the carnivore diet or whatever to lose weight, because all my life I've struggled to be a sensible weight. I've not been really heavy, but I've always put on a wee bit more than I should. And he started talking to me about the keto diet, and I says, well, I'm going to try that. And I became a real advocate of the keto diet. I researched the nuts of it. He actually says to me, see, before I tell you to eat bacon and eggs every morning, go and research it, because your doctor will tell you that will kill you and you'll lose confidence. So research it. And I researched the nuts off it, so I knew all about the keto diet. I went on a very strict version of it, and my doctors would say that thing that you don't ever want them to say. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And you're thinking, I'm paying you to fucking find out why it's making me healthy. And you're telling me just to keep doing it. You don't want to know, you know. And my cholesterol was up high, but everything else was perfect, which is why I've came to that. I'm kind of anti-statin cholesterol controlling drugs. Because at the time I was the healthiest, and they were saying to me, your bloods are magnificent. I mean, amazingly magnificent. There's literally no inflammation in your body or anything like that. But your cholesterol is 7.2. And I'm saying, well, that must be a healthy diet, right? And I took issue with my doctor when she said that, and I says, well, I'm not paying you money to tell me to keep doing what I'm doing. You have to understand what I'm doing. And her understanding was to send me to a doctor in London who knew more about LPL and lipids and all that than I did, which I thought was a bit like, why don't you read the British Medical Journal? They're now saying that it's not about cholesterol, it's about it's about other stuff in your body that can detect whether you're going to have heart attack risk or whatever. And so I went on that for quite a long time, became insanely healthy, lost 3 stone, looked the best in my life. The downside with the keto diet, of course, is it's so strict that it's very, very difficult to live on in this modern society we're in.
Sure, especially if you're travelling, I'm guessing.
Oh, if you're travelling, like I do a lot of, it's becoming better now, but there's very little, especially in America, that you can't eat. I mean, Americans could serve you a salad at 2,000 calories. I don't even know how you can do that. A salad at 2,000 calories. It's bonkers. Because they publish your calories and you say, I want a salad, 2,000 calories. I might as well have a burger.
Yeah.
Burger was 1,700 calories. I don't know how they do that. But so I probably know more about my health, internal health, my bloods. I had a discussion with my doctor the other day because I just got my bloods done, and I was describing them to her, and she goes, it's not natural that you know more about bloods than me. And I do. I can plot my bloods over the years, a trend in my bloods.
But I think that's the issue, is that a lot of people think that their doctor is God in that element. They will know exactly what they're talking about. They're going to know exactly what they're doing. They're going to know more than me. I've got friends that are doctors that used to be absolutely mental in school. And I'm not saying they're not good doctors, but a lot of this stuff, it's do the research yourself. And also, you've got AI to help you. Ask ChatGPT, give references to the studies in which it's referring to so that you know it's factual. And within an hour, you can become an expert at something that takes people years.
I'm going to tell you something. I've never used AI until this year for my bloods, for my health, and I did a full health review. So I put all the details, all the documents, all the operations I've had, my history, right back to 2015 before I went in the Arctic Trek in 2017, up to date with my latest bloods. And I get the most comprehensive and well thought through and educated report on my health I've ever seen in my life, where it also researched all the adverse theories of, keto, of carnivore versus the traditional. Because the trouble we've got now with our doctors, it's not they don't mean well. But first of all, doctors are too busy now to keep up to date. So that old professional development thing that they do, lots of doctors don't have time to do that anymore. So they're largely out of date with their own British Medical Journal recommendations. The second thing is, which I think is horrific, and there's been a big case in South Africa over recent years by somebody that recommended keto to a child and they get struck off a register for doing it. And that's a problem. If you break away from the incumbent medical thinking on lipids, for example, on cholesterol, then you risk being outed as a doctor. And so doctors won't take the risk. They cover their backside, And I've said to my family, and this is what I do, I take full responsibility for my own health. I don't expect a doctor to dig me out of a situation I don't. When you need doctors to be at their best is for trauma. Mm-hmm. So if you get hurt in an accident, this eye operation I've just had, which is horrendous to me, it's amazing what they've done with my eye. I mean, I hate to think about it, but it's amazing that the degree of skill they require and education they require to save my sight was incredible.
Right.
And you need doctors for that. You can't ever question a doctor that's for trauma. But for general health, there's few doctors, I think, in this country that can give you proper advice. Because I say to my doctor, I'm on a high fat, low sugar, low carbohydrate diet, right? and they say you're going to kill yourself. And they're not interested in finding out why my bloods are the way the bloods are. Now, think about it. I'm saying to my doctor, I eat bacon and eggs every day. I eat high fat everything. I don't eat any carbohydrates, less than 20 grams a day. I've lost 3 stone. My bloods are perfect. And you'd expect a doctor to say, I need to look into this. I need to find out why you're doing something that's, you've turned the recommended dietary medical system upside down, right?
And it's working.
And it's working, and you're the healthiest you've ever been. In fact, you're in the top 0.01% of the population. And they don't say, I want to look at how you do that. And for me, that's why you can't trust a doctor to give you good healthy living.
Did you find that your mental capabilities changed as you went on that diet?
Hugely.
You know what's really interesting is, so there's 2 kind of chemicals, if you want to call it that your brain can run on. And it's ketones, which you do when you go into ketosis, which is when you don't have carbs, so you're burning straight to your fats, or there's the carbohydrates breaking down into energy. And interestingly, there's been studies. We had a guy called Ali Houston on the podcast, and he's down at Cambridge, super genius guy. And he was going on about the different parts of the brain that the different energy sources activate. And essentially he was saying when you eat carbs, a lot of people have an adverse reaction to it because it's not how we used to be. If you think back to cavemen,
which is where you've got to think back for good health.
Exactly. And he said that there's a lot of people that have had depression or severe anxiety, brain fog, not being able to think. They switch to the keto diet, and because they're now running on ketones rather than carbs, essentially, their whole perception shifts. They feel lighter, they feel stronger, they feel mentally clear. And it's a bit like when you go in and get a big plate of pasta. It feels fucking incredible at the time, right? You're scoffing this down. And then after it, you're sinking into your seat and you're thinking,
you're bloated, you're lethargic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Here's a difficult, and I'll give you a good example of it, right? Because the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry control doctors, right? Doctors are invited to conferences and get paid £50,000 for talking at a conference, stuff like that, just to keep them in the loop, to sell their drugs. How many salespeople do you see in the medical profession where they're selling drugs? They're getting doctors to subscribe drugs in order to get some sort of kickback. And it's not a direct kickback because they can't do that now. It's like, we'll invite you to a conference and you could come and we'll pay all your expenses and all that kind of stuff. The pharmaceutical industry own doctors. The outlanders that then start to question whether we're doing the right thing, the traditional Western American diet they talk about, which is horrendous for the body. But they stand by that, still stand by that. And if you think about it, the fact that I says doctors don't ask why you're the healthiest person, they just tell you you're going to kill yourself, or they recommend you to somebody that will persuade you otherwise without looking at the evidence, is horrendous. And when you look at those doctors that are quite famous in the right circles with keto, for example, so you understand, like you've just said, that ketones are what the brain used to operate on. And this is where I go back to. If you want to find out how, look at the time frames. Humans in their current form have been around for 2.5 million years. 2.5 million years. We've only been growing our own crops. Most of the carbohydrates come from for 12,000 years, right? So if you compare it with an American football pitch, it's the last 6 or 7 inches where we've changed our diet dramatically since the 50s. Since they announced in the 50s, 70% of your diet should come from carbohydrate on very flawed evidence, right? But they got away with it because the food industry wanted you to say that, because it solves 2 problems. You can manufacture carbs very cheaply, and you can't feed the whole world on meats. You just can't do it. The world population is out of control. It's massively growing. You can't have enough cattle or raw beef, or especially grass-fed beef, to feed the world's population. So there's rationale behind keeping you on a diet that they can manufacture and keep the world, because our population's too big to sustain good health eating. But when you look at that, way back to there's a good book I read that was about the evolution of man and what they used to eat. And there's no doubt, there's hard evidence to show that men and women, the human beings have always ate meat. And in fact, the big change in men in terms of their size of the brain was facilitated by the growth in our brain feeding proteins. So our brains grew when we ate lots of protein. And even the way we got protein, and this is a thing that supports kind of this fasting movement everybody's into just now. Way back you never ate 3 times a day, way back in the beginning. You had to stalk an animal for, 18 hours before you could kill it and eat it. And then when you ate it, you overconsumed because you didn't know when your next meal was going to be. And that's why our body was created. That's what a gallbladder's for. A gallbladder's to manage an over intake of fat without making you ill, but still give you nourishment in your body and so on and so forth. And then they would go another 18 hours without eating again, right? But they only ever ate berries and carbohydrate stuff when they were out hunting animals. So they would pick berries in the ground, above ground berries and all that kind of stuff. And that's what. So we used to eat a very small amount of carbs and a very large amount of not just meat, but fatty meat. You know, so not as fatty meat as we get nowadays because they fatten cows up and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at deer, for example, deer's a very healthy meat because they only eat what's natural in evolution, and they're fit because they're out in the mountains all the time. So it's one of the healthiest meats to eat as opposed to manufactured beef and all that kind of stuff. So there's a wee bit of distinction you have to make between what beef was back then and what beef is now. You know, it's not the same product at all now because it's largely manufactured and either fed grain and all that kind of thing to fatten them up, whereas back in the day you hunted an animal that was out in the wilds eating natural things, no antibiotics or anything. So you've got to factor that into your thinking when you're doing it. So I don't totally believe that red meat's bad for you. I don't believe that at all. I believe red meat that's been handled too much by a processor is bad for you. But I think if you get grass-fed, real grass-fed or red meat and there's no antibiotics involved or no grain being fed to the cattle, then that's probably getting you close to the way we used to eat. And human beings have evolved for 2.5 million years because they were fit and healthy, because they lived like people that live off the land. It's only in the past 100 years we started eating sugar. The Victorians started eating sugar. And they thought that was great because it was sweet and only rich people could afford it. But our health has deteriorated over the past 100 years, and particularly over the past 50 years, because of this World Health Organization saying 70% of your food had to come from carbs. It's been a terribly detrimental thing in the human race, and our bodies now haven't evolved to manage 70% of carbs. That's why one of the key things, the reason you get the big chronic diseases is because of the amount of inflammation in your body. And almost everybody that eats a Western diet is chronically inflamed. And my job and my health and Ali's health and my family's health is to get the chronic inflammation down to near zero. However we achieve that, because I think that and high levels of vitamin D are what keep you from getting big chronic illnesses. Now, I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong, and I could go into my doctor next week and he could say, I've got 6 months to live. But I'll take that because I made the decision. But what I wouldn't do is a doctor tell me how to live and getting it wrong. Because I've relied on my doctor. And one thing we should never do is go and say, doctor, help me, give me a pill, help me. You've got to take responsibility for your own health, because you won't get told what you need to get told with doctors nowadays. And that's nothing to do with doctors, it's not their fault. It's because they'll be sued, they'll be extricated if they talk different from what the normal medical talk is. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And the whole world is scared to say the wrong thing, aren't they? So you need to take your responsibility for your own health.
I think when it comes to these kind of things, it's often the governing body that controls it, right? And often in the government, it's corrupt. And one thing I was going to ask you, and I'd love your opinion on it, is the getting into a business nowadays within the UK with the parameters that the government have set up and the kind of red tape that's around it. They don't make it exactly attractive for people to go into business. What is your kind of take on the way that Scotland, but also the UK in general, is treating family-run new businesses?
Let me focus on Scotland and tell you how I'd roll it out, because there's a lot of talk. It's easy for me to say the country should be run by businessmen. That's a normal thing you hear a businessman say. But that's not the whole solution. If you think about how you become successful as a nation, now we've had the whole independence thing with Scotland. We're going back into that again with the elections just by with. And I feel it's saying, see, rather than talk about independence, why don't you talk about creating an ambitious country? Because if you're going to get anybody over the curve, those that say no and those that say yes, it's not about selling the idea that we'll be our own champions, our own destiny and all that, because our politicians are as bad as any politician anywhere, right? You have to start with a country by saying we could be the best country in the world at technology, we could be the best country in the world at tourism, we could be the best country in the world at whiskey, we could be the best country in the world at a number of things. And then you've got to create an environment that allows people to show people we can do that. Because it's one thing talking about it, that's what politicians do. They talk about ambition and then they let you down the minute they're unelected, right? That's why people hate politicians. But set a vision first for the country to say Scotland's going to become a powerhouse in agentic AI. Because actually we're a powerhouse in technology. It's only a small step to become a powerhouse in agentic AI. But then what do? You allow people to take all their own risks with all their own money, with very little government support other than tokenised support. So people say, I'll give you a government grant. Oh, how much will that be? £5,000. And you're thinking, and I've got to fill out 57 forms for £5,000 and spend 5 hours of my life. I don't think so, right? What you've got to say is, we're going to help you become, with some real world help, open you up to some contracts to get started, open you up to some real funds that will get you started, and some technology and expertise that will help you figure out the £800 gorillas that you're going to experience along the way. But the most important thing is when those entrepreneurs actually create a business that gets going and they start making profit, why would you tax the hell out of their profit just because you've got the same broad parameters around capital gains tax, around all of this kind of stuff that you get in the tax regime we live in? Why would you not say something as simple as this? That setting aside all other tax requirements for you to pay a percentage of your profit or all that, if you take that money and you could evidence to us that you'll put it back into the Scottish economy and continue to build your business, then is that not a better long-term view than anybody could come up with? Because I'm going to say to you, I've made nice profit. That's an indication that I'm doing something right. It's successful, right? I've made £2 million profit. The government want £1.3 million of that profit in all your various taxes, and I'm going to give you it. Well, that has already set me back a wee bit, because I either have to leverage debt, which I can maybe do because I'm profitable, or I have to continue to struggle at a slower pace to build that business out in Scotland. But why would you not come at me and say, I'm going to let you keep that £2 million if you can evidence that you're going to invest it to grow your business even bigger? Because if I had another 70 employees, you're getting all the PAYE, national insurance, you're reducing the bill on the people that are unemployed, they're probably going to be healthier because they're active and working with a sense of purpose and all that kind of stuff. There's so many things to grow in a business that are better for a country and an economy. And the problem is the politicians can't see that. And the reason they can't see it is we've got this continual cycle of 4 or 5 year elections, right? Which means that they govern for 3 years with maybe some ambitious plans, and then they defend for 2 years coming up to the election. And it all goes to shit because the opposition are intending to dismantle it just so they can say, we didn't agree with that, we've done something different. And the disappointing thing for Scotland is we've had SNP in for a long, long time now. And even though they couldn't predict they were going to be in for a long time, so I guess you can say they're still working in a 4 or 5 year cycle of electoral votes. The problem is that system almost defies the need to set some ambitious vision that we could all get behind, this critical mass I talked about. For me, the best way to do that is to say, let's set a vision for Scotland. A party political, right? It's nothing to do with parties. Let's set a vision for what we want Scotland to be. Maybe that visionary group should be led by business people that have got an ability to visualise. What do we want Scotland to be, right? Let's set some rules that say the key parts of that vision cannot be taken away from or jumped on by any political party. They stay in place for 50 years. Because that's what it takes to build a vision in a country, right? They stay in place for 50 years. I mean, people talk about me selling a unicorn for £1.3 billion. That took nearly 30 years to get there. People want to do things in a day these days. They want to build success in 5 years. It took 15 years to get the hotel to where it is just now. So you've got to look long term if you want to do something great. And so if we set a vision for Scotland and says this is what we want to do, and no political party coming in and out of power are going to be able to interfere with that vision. They could do things and change policies round about it, but the fundamentals of that vision are got to stay in place. It can't be affected by, the various rules of various different political parties or leaders which are also popularity, right? It's a popularity contest. I want to do something that people will vote for me. It's nothing to do with the health of the country or the health of the nation. And I think if you've done that and then you put the practical steps in to say there's going to be rules that say that if you reinvest your profit from your profits into this economy, into growing this business, even if you're growing it outside the country but into a global superpower, then ultimately I'm going to benefit for that in the long term as a government, as a country, taxes and all that kind of stuff, employment and all that kind of stuff. It seems such a simple solution to me that they can't do because it's populism we're in just now. Look at the worst period we're in our history that I could remember is people are getting voted in now across the world because they're populists. It's nothing to do with a long-term concern for the country. And for me, when I lead a company, I'm setting my vision out 15, 20 years away.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to lead a country, you should set your vision out 15, 20 years and not let that be interfered with. All political parties have to agree that they're going to work to sustain that vision. Because at the end of the day, they're only a placeholder for a period of time. Don't let them interfere and change it all and destroy stuff. And what have happened in Scotland as a result of that? So SNP for a while there were very anti-fat cats and tax the rich and tax the wealthy. You say that in a country like this, people get behind it because they don't like wealthy people because they resent them or it makes them feel bad. Why don't we say to them, worship your people, listen to them, let them guide you, let them lead you. Lift your level of ambition, because I came out of Easter House with nothing. So I'm living proof that you can do something great for a standing start of nothing, absolute zero. And so, if people were to believe what I believed I could do, then anybody could change your life. You don't need a help. You don't need a hand from anybody. You could change your life yourself. But let's agree this vision that we're trying to do that's not about politicians being popular, because I hate populism. It destroys visions. And if you get, that's why I don't vote for parties anymore. People think, are you a Tory, are you Labour, are you SNP? I don't vote for parties, I vote for leaders. I look for somebody that truly inspires, and that's who I want to vote. It's nothing about the party. Unfortunately, as you've seen in this country and other countries, people that inspire are often taken out of power because they're trying to create something that others don't like. You know, it's all about, I think Billy Connolly once said, the very desire to become a politician should ban you from ever becoming one. Right? And that's true to this day. That's true to this day. So I don't think the UK is set up any better. One good thing about America is that when you fail in America, your value goes up. If you fail 2 or 3 times, you become one of the most valuable people as a leadership person to follow, because people see failure as an opportunity to learn, and it toughens you up because you don't want to continue to fail. Failure here, they ban you for being a director, and they don't allow you to lead another company. It's bizarre, you know. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong. If you do something naughty as a director, you deserve to be banned, right? I make that, but there's a stigma that goes along with failure here, where people laugh at you and go, look at you, thought you're too big for your boots, you failed. Makes me feel better.
Do you think that there should be, because I do, there should be legal ramifications for the government when they go back on something or they lie, because a lot of what they do is lying. Like I look at Switzerland's system, and essentially what happens in Switzerland, everything is put online in a document, and if you go against your manifesto, what you put online, there's criminal charges. And that's brilliant, because then you know that you're not going to be lied to, and there's a degree of honesty around it.
Well, I mean, nobody should be allowed to get into a position anywhere by making false promises, right?
Sure.
Because if I'm a businessman and I say to my customers, give me this contract and I'll save you 10%, and actually once I get the contract, I charge them 2% more, there's going to be consequences, right? They're going to say to me, we're tearing this contract up, we'll take you to court, you went against your word. Yet politicians could promise you the earth. Again, look what's happening in America. You know, a basic thing you hear on the TV every day, I'll never take you into another war. The populism allows people to get away with that, yeah, because they take you into another war. You should almost be able to sack a politician just for that one thing. And it's because we've become complacent with it. So we're used to, look at Brexit, we're used to them saying things that are fundamentally wrong. Remember the £350 million a week thing in Brexit? It was disproven. Yet we went through disconnection from a European Union on the back of almost that one thing. That's what got people to the point where they voted to leave Brexit. Yet it was a lie. But nobody's been held account to that. It's because politicians protect themselves, don't they? Because they all lie to one degree or another. There's very few, see the seasoned politicians of the past. Actually, I say I support people rather than parties. There's people like George Galloway who I wouldn't support his politics. But he's fundamentally a good politician because he believes what he says and he tries to do what he says he does. There's very few politicians like that left, you know, the Michael Foots of the day and all these kind of people. The Donald Dewar that we had in Scotland. These were people that stated facts and tried their best to live up to that. We don't have that anymore. We have very few politicians you would look at and say, I can't wait to hear them speaking in Parliament. I mean, it's almost a switch off. You want to switch off a telly. And so I think if we should there be criminal convictions? Why not? Because if I lie as a businessman and I gain from that, I'm probably going to go to prison. Yeah. Yet the people who are making decisions about how I run my business are getting away with it. And right across the board, I mean, some of the things you see with the current government we've got here in the UK, not sticking to what they said they're going to stick to, you know, it becomes a headline in the newspaper for a wee bit and then they talk about something else. Yeah. And in fact, they usually put something out there
to block it or to cover it up.
Yeah. I mean, I listened to the whole, a few weeks ago, this is hilarious to me. This is how lank focused they are. We're right in the middle of, do we join the war with Iran to support the Americans and all that kind of serious stuff going on. And I woke up in the morning, switched on Sky News, which I watch every morning, and I seen Keir Starmer talking for 45 minutes on what he's going to do to reduce shoplifting. Right? Now, I don't want somebody to walk out my hotel with a chair, right? I don't want anybody to shoplift anybody. That hurts business people. But I don't think a Prime Minister should be talking about reducing shoplifting right in the middle of potential World War III.
He's doing that deliberately, though.
He's doing it deliberately because he wants to create an agenda where people get distracted and talk about things. 45 minutes talking about shoplifting. Meanwhile, people are shoplifting out their head for 45 minutes probably. I know it's an issue, but it's not nearly as big an issue as two nuclear powers fighting each other. And I can't understand why politicians think, if it was me, I'd say, listen, I don't want shoplifting, but I'm not going to talk about it now. There's more important things. See that ADHD thing? I'm focusing on the big things right now. We'll sort the small things out later. But our Prime Minister spoke for 40 minutes on Sky News about stopping shoplifting, which I think was diabolical. So diabolical it was funny. But that is not what we should be talking about. We should be focused on the things that I'm Scottish through and through. You know, I'm wearing the Wallace sword thing for the basketball. I'm Scottish through and through. If you cut me open, I'll be Scottish through and through. I care about Scotland more than anything. But I'm going to tell you this. I wouldn't vote for an independent Scotland unless Scotland becomes fiercely ambitious and looks to the people that are creating that enterprise and ambition as people that they should find as a role model. Because while we put people down that are successful, and while we tax, people that have been successful as if they weren't meant to be there, then what is Scotland going to become if it's independent? If we're going to be independent, we have to have an ambition to be the best nation in the world, surely. Scotland's an amazing nation. We've got 40 million people diaspora that round the world that have got Scottish ancestry. That means we travel well. Also means we reproduce well. 40 million people. We're a country of 5.5 million. We've got 40 million people in our diaspora, which is incredible. Why could we not be the best nation in the world at everything we do? It only takes us to believe that we've got clever people that can do that we're going to set this grand vision for Scotland, which is controlled by something higher than politicians. So politicians can't mess with it. And then we can force policies into place that recognise that companies need help and aren't always fighting against heavy taxes and all that kind of stuff to try to build their company. But until someday a leader steps forward and says, put the policies aside, we want to be the most ambitious nation in the world, and we want to be the greatest tourist nation in the world, because we've got the most beautiful country in the world, bar none. We invented whiskey, the best drink in the world, bar none, right? We've always been underdogs, and the whole philosophy around about the gladiators is about that. We've always been underdogs, but why don't we step out of that underdog position and say we're going to be world beaters? And that's a person I would follow. It takes me back to the Braveheart movie when William Wallace said to Robert the Bruce, he looks into his eyes and he says, just lead us and I'll follow you. You'd expect William Wallace to say, step aside, I want to lead. He says, just lead us and I'll follow you. Everybody, doesn't matter how good they are, how brave they are, just wants something to lead them, somebody to lead them. And I'd love for Scotland to come up with somebody that was so inspirational, so visionary, so apolitical, that they said, let's make Scotland the best country in the world, right across the board, the best technology, best tourism, best whiskey, best attitude to life. We're going to take agentic AI and we'll become the most powerful company in the world at employing that. Do all of that kind of stuff, and I'll follow that person. And I don't really care what their political party is. I prefer if they weren't a politician. But politicians have to be given their place. They govern. They don't create, they don't envision, they just govern. Get them back to governing, keeping everybody safe and keeping everybody according to contracts and good policies and health and safety and discrimination. Get them doing that. Take them out of running projects like the HS2 project, or God forbid the tram project in Edinburgh, which was a disaster. The shipyard project in Glasgow, which is a disaster. Put politicians into business, they're worse than useless.
Yeah.
Put business people into politics, I think it would be the same. Create a differentiate between the two of them, let the business people and the entrepreneurs set the vision. There's great entrepreneurs in this country, the Tom Hunters and out of this world. They're great entrepreneurs and great visionaries, but they're not allowed to be a visionary because politics gets in the way. And I think if you created vision, we're trying to do something with the basketball, which is unbelievable. It's a world-class kind of plan for the basketball, because I've got the vision to do that. But along the way, I'll meet lots of barriers. Yeah, you can't do that. That's devolved. Sport's devolved in Scotland. You can't do that. You can't do this. It's all bollocks, to be honest.
It's quite inspiring hearing you talk about it, because people get very depressed in Scotland and caught up about this kind of stuff, and you're someone that has the means that you could easily get out of the country and easily go away, but instead you're reinvesting heavily into for example, the basketball. Was it 20 million you put into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be more than that in the future to come, but I'm bringing other people in to help me do it because it's a much bigger project. But I mean, people say all the time, why would you build a 5-star hotel in Blantyre? My answer is, why not? Why not? Yeah. Because it could transform Blantyre and that whole area, and it has done. You can see all the new housing coming into Blantyre and the new cafes coming into Blantyre. And I love Scotland, and we've not only put all our. I mean, me and Ali sometimes think, why are we doing this in Scotland? And it's usually after somebody's put you down. You know?
Aye.
Somebody's put you down and said, who do you think you are? Nobody can afford to go to your hotel, and you're like, so I don't read socials and that. I'm like, just, you know, I'd like to persuade them and say, come and see the hotel and see what we've done here, and why don't you do something great with your life, you know? But people ask all the time why you done it in Scotland, because I love Scotland, right? Ali loves Scotland, and I'll not be buried anywhere else. I've said that. You can't, I don't want to live anywhere else. We've got some nice homes around the world, I have to tell you, right? And we go there and we love the sunshine and we love the lifestyle and we love the luxury. But 4 weeks, Scotland calls us home. That's what I feel. I feel like Scotland's calling for me. And the most enjoyable thing me and Ali do now is we've got a small motorhome and we go out into the Scottish Hills and you just feel so connected with your land.
Yeah.
I could feel almost a bit like we feel with the castle. I could feel like my ancestors have walked in the same places before me. And you can't do that when you go to America. You can't do that when you go to Spain. You come home, you get into the hills, you feel, God, yeah, I can visualise my ancestors walking in these hills all the years ago with a very simple life that we crave. And that's a great thing about Scotland is there's a deep spiritual connection if you're Scottish. And I'm 82% Scottish because I did my DNA thing. 82% Scottish, 6% Irish, and the rest is Viking. Hey! Well, that's where I get my fighting spirit from. But I love Scotland for the spiritual connection with it. There's something that means more than material wealth or anything else, and it's when your soul pops out your chest when you look at the hills, because that happens not because you're just looking at something beautiful, because you're looking at where your family and ancestors, you know, through thousands of years came from. And you visualise them doing the things that, you know, were hard at the time and how easy your life is and so on and so forth. And we often walk in the hills or drive in the hills and you just sit staring at something without any conversation and you just feel whole again. So I get away for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, but we do like to get away, but you come back in the piss and rain at Glasgow Airport and you just feel whole again. You know?
Have you been to the Isle of Harris and Lewis?
Oh, have I been to the Isle of Harris and Lewis? Can I tell you our spa has been created around products that have been manufactured from the land in the Isle of Harris.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Nothing's been through a lab. It's a place called AS Apocryphy, and the woman that owns it called Amanda. You should get her on your podcast. She's the most interesting person I've ever met in my life. She just fills your heart. She makes your heart glow when you talk to her. She's very, very funny as well. But she's creating our entire suite of products for us out of the land. And when we went up to see her recently, she had us walking on the beach picking up seaweed, you know, and gale force winds and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, the Isle of Harris is probably the most beautiful place on earth.
Oh, it's stunning.
There's beaches up there that people wouldn't believe is part of Scotland.
Yeah,
right?
Lascantire.
Yeah. I mean, the Isle of Lewis, there's a lot of peat in the Isle of Lewis. Right? Me and Ali went out for a cycle one day, 15 miles to the Carnish Stones, which is the most hellish cycle I've ever done. The 15 miles on the way back, with the wind in her face, all I could see was Ali's shoulders going like that, and that was Ali going, fucking hell, what am I doing here? Fucking hell, what am I doing here? It was horrible, right? But Isle of Harris is a different thing altogether. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth, I think.
Absolutely stunning.
And we've got a real connection to it with the hotel, to the extent where the lodges Ali's building are called Hebridean lodges. The spa is a Hebridean spa, and all the products are from Harris, and they've never been in a lab. And this woman makes the most incredible products, and all the rituals designed round about them are designed round about Harris, the Isle of Harris. And I've been there several times in my motorhome now. I had to buy a smaller motorhome because of the width of the roads.
Aye.
I was terrified driving some of the roads. But it's a place I've been to now, I think, 3 times. I wonder why I've not been going to it all my life.
Yeah.
And that, not just Harris, Skye's beautiful, of course, but the Isle of Mull is even more beautiful. So we went up through the Isle of Mull and then get the ferry across to Harris, Lewis and Harris. Drove through Lewis quickly because it's pretty dull. But by the way, there's got to be the biggest natural carbon sink in the world because of the amount of peat up there. So I was wanting to buy Lewis at one point just so I can make a fortune out of charging all these airlines for their carbon credits, you know. It's the most valuable piece of real estate, you know, because back in the 80s, the government got them to flood all the peat bogs to try to grow forest. And they handed out big grants for people to flood the peat bogs and grow forest, not realising that peat's too acidic to grow trees, so nothing growing it. And now they're giving grants to drain the peat bogs and get them back to carbon sinks, because one of the best carbon sinks in the world for taking carbon out of the atmosphere is a peat bog, and we've got an abundance of it, you know, in Harris, in Lewis and Harris. But yeah, so there's a deep connection with Harris, and I think it's quite joyful for us because I've never really travelled through Scotland in my young life because I either didn't understand what Scotland was, in terms of how beautiful it was, nor had the money to do it. And we've grown this connection with Harris. It makes us feel alive, to be honest. I spent a wee bit of time in North Eust, which is just across a wee bit for Harris, because my brother, who was quite troubled, got kicked out of the house, met a girl and ended up in North Eust, and he took us across there to live on a farm for a couple of days, which for a wee boy feaster house was quite enlightening. You know, I think I got a belt in the ear because I broke one of his wee fishing floats, thinking it was a ball I was playing with. But so I spent a bit of time in North Eust, Benbecula and South Eust. That was very exotic. The first flight I was ever on in my life was flying from Glasgow Airport to Benbecula.
Wow.
And when we landed in Benbecula, I could see my brother walking up to the airplane because there's no places you walk up to the airplane because of the way he walks. Us Timoneys have a very distinctive walk. And I watched him and says, that's my brother. And I stayed with him on this farm for 2 weeks. And that, I guess, planted a wee seed in me about a remote Scotland being somewhere you can, if you feel some kind of mental health, just go to the house in Scotland. It's gone in no time at all, you know. But yeah, I love Harris. Have you got a connection with Harris?
Oh, for sure. I've filmed there so much now that, again, I was similar to you. You know, I didn't really truly understand the beauty of it. I kind of saw it on the screen and thought, it's Scotland. I can go elsewhere. And then I was extraordinarily lucky that I travelled with my job to remote parts of the earth, and there's nothing like it. And obviously, there's nobody there. You go to this beach, Luscantire Beach, which is beautiful blue sea, white sands for miles and miles on end, as far as the eye can see, and there's nobody there. And you know,
not even on a bright summer's day.
Exactly. And I've been so lucky to travel all corners of the earth, and there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. I was going to ask you, so there's been this incredible journey that you've been on, from smart waiters to the hotel to the basketball, and your kind of thread through it all. What do you think would be your purpose when you look at it now? Because when I look at it at the start, it was getting out of the situation you were in, and then it was building the business, and then it was selling out for the money that you sold out for. But what is the purpose now?
I guess there's a thing changes in your life when you do something really big. Like, it wasn't even for me when we sold the company to KKR, because we listed it in 2011, and that became a big turning point because I became particularly wealthy at that point, because I got a lot of money out of the flotation. Not anywhere close to the wealth we ultimately have, but that changes your mind a wee bit once you're, you know, I asked me earlier on, once you're financially secure, a lot of the daily worries about your house and being able to pay your bills go away. And for me, I tended to think, what's my bigger purpose? What's my purpose beyond money? And that's really what drives me now, is what am I trying to do with the wealth? And I think there's a lot of wealthy people who shouldn't have wealth. I should tell you that. I don't really move in wealthy people's circles, and it's deliberate because a lot of wealthy people are assholes, to be honest with you. That's a generalism, but there's a lot of wealthy people who shouldn't have wealth, or they're not best positioned to have wealth.
Sure.
But the worst feature about it is they want people to see they've got wealth for wealth's sake. And that makes people feel bad. You know, you show people your nice Gucci boots or whatever. What you're saying to them is you can't afford them, that's why I'm showing you them. And it's a horrible feature of somebody that gets wealth. And so I think you've got a responsibility to show people that it doesn't really change you. That you've got a good enough head on your shoulders that the wealth doesn't become about having things. It becomes about what you do with the wealth. And me and Ali originally rescued this castle not because we thought we'd turn into a profitable event space, because we heard that developers were going to turn this beautiful 14th, 15th century castle into flats. And that was just so alien to us. It was like, no, we have to do something. This is real Scottish heritage here. So that started off as, the purpose for that was to save a bit of Scotland for ourselves and to do something amazing with it. And the basketball was something similar. I seen in the basketball, which we'd been in for 17 years with the girls team, that we were turning the girls team professional. Now, anybody that knows me knows I'm a big supporter of women in business and women in sport and all that. I'm not a box ticker, I have to say. I criticise a lot of men for ticking the box. Oh, we've got a women's team that ticks a box. I grew up in women's basketball. I grew up recognising that women are held back by men, and women are taught to appreciate what opportunities a man gave you. So that was particularly true in basketball. See, a dog's listening to that. You know? But for too long in sport, and I think sport and business are much the same thing, is that the women are given the scraps in sport, and then they're blamed for not having big attendances. That's what happens with women in sport. Yeah, women don't get attendances here because you've given them all the shit. You've given them all the scraps. So we came to the basketball, and I did what I always wanted to do in business, was give women the same platform. The same dressing rooms, the same gymnasium, that's the physical things, but the same attention to them, the same exposure in the press, the same opportunity to excel. And so when we built the arena in Play Sport, we said that there's a show court and there's a practice court, and every day you'll swap over. So the women get the show court, the men get the practice court, and the next day you swap over. And we said that because we didn't want the women thinking the men always get the show court and they get the practice court.
Sure.
Right? And what happens when you treat women like that is when they walk into that arena, the men kind of expect it. They walk into the arena and they think, well, I've played in some bigger arenas, this is nice. So the women go in and go, never experienced this in my life, this is ours to play in. Right? And so what you get when you treat women genuinely with respect, because for me, men only exist because women are really good at what they do, right? Women generally, and this is generalism again, are very maternal. They're meant to be maternal. But that leads them to do things in life that move us forward as a race, right? Women create homes. Women create safe family environments. Women create stabilisation in what people exist for, which is to grow and to recreate and get stronger as a race, right? Men sometimes take that for granted, and they tend to keep women in their place, and they use that stability the women's given them to create a name for themselves, where their ego's out of control and they want to create all of this, and it's like, oh, I don't want my wife to take credit for it, or, you know, I don't want them to think I've only got this because my wife's created a stable environment. Yet the very reason that a man can excel in business is largely because a woman's taking care of the stable home they need in order to function, right? And so when women I remember when women started coming into business, you know, they started to come out of being a housewife and started being in business. Men were threatened by that. It was a bit like, you get back in the house, you know, you're no good at that. And we're not that far forward now, because men tick boxes for women and put women on their board because they have to have a woman on their board. But they fail to realise that if you bring the skills that women have to a business environment, there's no ceiling. Because the thing I hate about business is men get full of their own self-importance. It's a natural thing. Men have to be a bit egotistical to be the kind of person. If you go back to the caveman days when they were out hunting and they bring home the beef and they're proud and they're like, this is very manly. And actually, if you're a hunter, that's what you feel, you know. You come back and you think, this is very manly. I'm providing for my family and all that kind of thing. There's a natural instinct to become egotistical, but it's when you become over egotistical and you're threatened by your wife doing anything that shows that you're not the head of the family. And I'm not threatened by that, and I don't think anybody should. I talk a lot about Alison because I couldn't function the way I function without her, without what she creates, which is first and foremost, she's created this amazing hotel and amazing arena and all that kind of stuff. But first and foremost, she's created beautiful homes for us. Wherever our homes are, they're beautiful. They're very family oriented, nothing showy. You would expect me to have a kick-ass house and look at this is beautiful. You walk into any of our houses, you say, this is a home. You can tell it's a home. And it's not because there's stuff lying about, it's because everything looks as if it's tipping the wink to how you should feel when you get into somebody's home. And you allow those people to thrive in business, and you've got something in your hands that's better than any man can produce. I mean, I'll give you an example. We talked about politicians earlier. Take all the male politicians out and put female politicians in, and you've got, by exception, one or two that have got out of control egos. And by the way, a woman with an out of control ego is far more dangerous than a man with an out of control ego. But by and large, they're then starting to think about creating an environment that's conducive to a happy family life, safety for the kids. Would they start a war? Would they start a war over something ridiculous? Would they start a war over, you know, look at me, I could destroy your nation and all that kind of stuff? Women would never do that. At the very least, they would have a full discussion about it and how that affects their family and the environment we all live in. That's a safe place to be. So I think as men have evolved, they've become too big for their boots, and they should let women make some of the major decisions. And me and Ali are very kind of equal. You know, Ali will put me in my place a lot of the time. She once said to me, I came in for work one time stressed. Now, I was right to be stressed, but I came in for work stressed, and she looked at me and said, who's died? And I says, what? I kind of took me aback. She goes, who's died? I says, what do you mean, who's died? Who's fucking died? I says, nobody's died. Nobody's died. I says, no. She goes, well, don't you ever come into this house looking like that again unless somebody's died. And she put me right back in my place. It was like, don't you ever get stressed unless somebody's died. That's what's important. Somebody in the family's died. Somebody you love's died. The rest of the shit, that's not important. You know, with the issues the last couple of days where I've had big 800-pound girls, and she says to me, listen, we'll sort it. We'll sort it and move on. This is about having a nice settled life. They bring something to the equation that's not like, I need to fix this. You know, I need to fix this. I need to go toe-to-toe with somebody. And so I don't tick boxes. So when I get women in my business, I want them to fly. And I don't want men to put them down. And I would react badly to a man that was holding a woman back or try to put them down, because the greatest thing I could do going forward is empower more women in my business, not for the sake of having more women in the business, because they bring something to the business that men can't understand, and they put men in their place. When you step out of line with your ego go out of control, women are first to say, who the hell do you think you are? Just settle down, you know. Whereas men, I always say I don't really go to networking events where it's predominantly male dominated, because men slap me in the back and go, that was brilliant, selling your business unicorn to KKR. And I'm looking at them thinking, I don't even know you, don't slap me in the back, you know. I want to go back. I want to go at the house at night and Ali slaps me in the back and says, well done. And then you feel $1 million. But some guy tried to hang off my success by saying you're good. And by the way, in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you what I want out of you. I'm like, fuck off. You know, that's why I don't go to these things. And you'll see when I do go to these things, I talk a lot about Ali and I talk a lot about women, because I'm trying to send a message out to people. Follow my example. Get rid of ego in your business. It's the worst thing you can have in your business is big egos. They'll destroy your business. Bring women into your business because they bring a level of sensibility, and Ali's very good at that. She's very quick to put me, if I get a wee bit too big for my boots, she'll say, just sell yourself down, what do you think it is? You know, and you feel a bit, I'm Steve Timoney. And then you go, I'm Steve Timoney, right enough, you know. If it wasn't for having Ali in my life in the last 20 odd years, I wouldn't be the person I am. When I met Ali, I was wanting to build Coca-Cola, you know, and I was wanting to die at 95 and leave Coca-Cola as a £50 billion business. And Ali came in and said to me, what does he want out of life? And it was that discussion that made me think, right, I need to exit the business, because it's not about the business. It's actually about me feeling good as a man, me feeling good that I've provided for my family, but then enjoying our success together. And that's why she's such an important part, because I couldn't function even envisioning what I'm doing just now without knowing that she's going to say, who do you think you are, Steve? Come on, that's a bit over the top. You shouldn't have spoke to somebody like that. Don't forget, you know, if I snap at somebody, she'll be first to say to me, I know you've got a lot in your mind. Go and apologise. You know, and at the moment you're thinking it's okay, I can snap at somebody, I'm the boss. But I'll say, go and apologise. You can't snap at anybody. They don't know you've got problems. They don't know you've got things to worry about. Go and say sorry. Push your tail between your legs, but it's the right thing to do. You know, that's kind of where I am with that.
Good. Well, listen, I know that you've got an appointment at 1. I just want to say a huge thank you for stopping by. You spent more time with me than I thought as well, so I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate all the advice, and I'm sure so many people are going to take so much from this and kind of be inspired by hearing your story as well. Personally, I find it really inspirational that you're still investing so heavily in Scotland, despite, in my view, what the government are doing at the moment can be perceived often as quite negative. So really inspirational. I appreciate it.
I think if I can make Scotland a better country by putting what I've done in Scotland, I never had to leave Scotland to do what I've done, putting it back into Scotland, that's what I'm all about. I'm not out for glory. I'm not out for trying to help anything other than the people I grew up and I live with in the country I love so much, you know, and Ali's very aligned with that. We'll put everything we've got back into this country, and hopefully somebody can take what we leave and take it to new levels. And I hope one day we realise that we need to have a vision for what we have here, and we need to allow nobody to interfere with that vision, because that's what you do. I said about being lonely as a businessman. It's because you have a vision and nobody believes it, and so you carry that on your shoulders and you carry the burden of trying to make people believe that for a long time, and we need to go through that as a country before we're going to be great. Otherwise, we're just going to be the also-rans and the underdogs every time we go to the World Cup. I want to go to the World Cup believing we can win it, which we do, by the way, knowing that we probably won't. But one of these days we'll get to the World Cup and say, we're going to win this, and we will win it. And I firmly believe that. It's, you know, winning the World Cup and doing great things in basketball and do great things in business is about self-belief. It's about believing you can do it, and that often transforms the way you behave and often gets you there. So I'm delighted to come along. I'm a great follower of your podcast. I think you're up there with the best of them, and it's diverse enough for me to be interested in a lot of your different subject material. So yeah, maybe get me back in 3 or 4 years' time and see if I was talking shit.
I appreciate that, mate. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.